There we go. We record all the Marine Planning Committee meetings, and then we post them to the web page. And the transcription started. Thank you, Susan. We post those meetings to the web page so that people can revisit it at a later date if they want to hear what's going on. And sorry, still trying to open one document. Oh, I know why. Because I posted it to shared drive. There we go. I hid it for myself. Yeah, so you're welcome to put yourself on video, especially when you're speaking. I think it's nice to put, a name with a face. We do have a couple of presentations today, but again, that's totally up to you. And sometimes there's issues because it's being recorded. There's issues with recording, your likeness and voice and all that stuff and putting it out there for the world to see. So I personally stay off video, but you're welcome to do whatever you like. I introduced our co-chairs, Mike Conroy and Susan Chambers, who will run the show for the most part, but we kind of take turns. Susan takes a lot of notes. There is a Google Doc that is shared with all the MPC members, and you'll see there's a notes page that Susan has probably already started populating, and people on the MPC are welcome to add things into that, add notes or questions or whatever. That's our own sort of internal meeting record. This is the publicly noticed meeting in the Federal Register, and I'm glad that we have some good attendance in addition to the Marine Planning Committee members. There's a public comment period starting, I think it's at 1 p.m. 2 p.m., sorry, at 2 p.m. And if we get to it earlier, then that is fine. What I usually do is ask for a show of hands. You can raise your virtual hand. Not right now, but as we get a little closer, just so we have an idea of how many people are going to speak. And if it's a lot, then we're going to ask you to limit it to a certain number of minutes. And I think we'll have one of the offshore wind lessees give like a couple of slides and spend a few minutes just giving an update on their survey and assessment, site assessment activities. Yeah, if you're a non-MPC member and you have a clarifying question, you can raise your hand or you can post it in the chat. Please do not use the chat for substantive discussions. It just makes it difficult. And then we have basically two different meetings going on, two different conversations at the same time. So please don't use the chat feature for that, sort of substantive things. Use it for sharing information or links or things like that. Or if you're having technical trouble, speaking or whatever. But, we run things fairly loosely. So if you have issue, feel free to raise your hand. I think that concludes my opening remarks. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Kerry Griffin. I'm on the Pacific Fishery Management Council staff. I guess with that, I will turn to Mike and Susan, who will walk through the agenda and see if there's any questions about what we're doing today and the agenda and that sort of thing. So, Mike, Susan, why don't you take it away?
Okay, I have way too many windows open and I can't find what I'm looking for. Hang on one second.
You want me to do it, Susan?
Sure, you usually do that and I take the notes. So yeah, we got through most everything. So the first part, so go ahead.
Yeah, all right. So for our agenda, starting in 7 minutes or sooner, depending upon where we get on things, we're going to get an update from Lisa Pfeiffer on NIMS West Coast Offshore Wind Strategic Plan. Then at 11 o'clock, or after the conclusion of that first agenda item, we will get an update on some NMFS fisheries spatial data for offshore California. And the agenda indicates that Kelly Andrews will be providing that. That is changing. It is not going to be Kelly, but rather it is going to be Blake from NMFS who will be covering that. Kelly is otherwise preoccupied. Then after that agenda item, we're going to get an update from Nessie on all things BOEM. After that, we'll take a lunch, and then when we come back from lunch, we'll go through our typical state-by-state update for the 3 West Coast states for which offshore wind may be a thing. We'll get some updates on timelines with regards to things that have been in our year at a glance. Given that Steve is not here, we'll probably try to tag team any tribal update if there is some. Then we'll have our public comment period at 2 o'clock, and then a couple of agenda items after that for the MPC to discuss what's coming next, advanced briefing book deadlines, writing our reports, and all that fun stuff. And then workload planning and upcoming activities, which, as I'm sure many of you are well aware, and those of you who are not well aware, you will hear throughout the day that there is no shortage of things coming up upon which the council may want to weigh in. So I'm sure I'll be discussing that during workload planning and upcoming activities. And that's about it. I guess, Carrie, do we want to ask if there's any additional items folks want to bring up?
Yeah, now would be the time.
I am seeing no hands.
I am also seeing no hands.
Good job on putting the agenda together. Well, do we want to move into our first item a little bit early, Carrie?
Yeah, I think so. I guess I'm also wondering, maybe we should just back up a sec. Just looking at the attendees, I will just, I don't think we need to go around and do introductions for everyone, but I think it might be helpful just to rattle off the names of the actual Marine Planning Committee members for those who are less familiar with us. So just real quick, Mike Conroy and Susan Chambers are the co-chairs, and other members are Corey Niles, Crystal D'Souza, I'm just going down our list here. Jessica Watson, Megan Waters, Mike Okaneski. I am on council staff, Carrie Griffin, and then we also have Steve Scheiblower and Steve Joner. Richard Heap is with the Salmon Advisory Subpanel. He's not with us right now, but he's going to try to join. He's an interim appointment through the end of the year. And Lila Issei is the National Fisheries Service representative. Scott McMullen, if I missed you. And I think I got everyone. If I missed anyone, please speak up. But those are the members of the Marine Planning Committee. And the main purpose of this meeting is to put together a report that will go in the advanced briefing book for the June Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting. Okay, now I think we can turn to our first presenter if that's all right with everyone.
Yep, sure. 1 second. I'll go ahead and introduce Lisa.
Thank you, Lila.
This is Lila Issei. So thank you, Carrie. And a correction on the agenda item, just briefly. Lisa will be presenting on our NMFS West Coast Offshore Wind Strategic Science Plan, not a broader strategic plan. So apologies for not catching that when you sent around the draft agenda, Carrie. So Lisa is a fisheries economist with the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, who many of you know. And the Northwest and Southwest Fisheries Science Centers in the West Coast Regional Office. Together, we have an offshore wind team, which I chair, and Lisa is an integral member of this team. And over the last year or so, she has led our team in developing a strategic science plan for offshore wind to guide NMFS's activities. So yeah, Lisa, you can go to the next slide. So as you all well know, BOEM is the lead agency for offshore wind leasing, and NIMS has a regulatory and scientific role in BOEM's process. So offshore wind lessees seek authorization from NIMS under the Marine Mammal Protection Act for their surveys, construction, and monitoring activities, if those could result in a take under the MMPA. BOEM seeks consultations from NIMS under the Endangered Species Act and the Magnuson-Stevens Act for Essential Fish Habitat and the Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act. And these consultations are focused on the site assessment and characterization activities in a lease area and the cable routes to shore, and for proposed offshore wind farm construction. The Army Corps also seeks these types of consultations from NIMS for the permits they will issue. And NIMS also provides comments to BOEM on the NEPA documents associated with these activities, and we contribute our specialized expertise and scientific information about NOAA trust resources to the NEPA documents. And we also must comply with NEPA for any authorizations that we would provide under the MMPA. And we also provide scientific information and recommendations about NOAA trust resources to BOEM in their siting process, such as for the spatial model they did in siting the Oregon wind energy areas. And throughout all of this work, of course, we must uphold our tribal treaty trust responsibilities. And overall, we also provide and will be providing scientific information to understand and monitor the impacts of offshore wind energy on NOAA trust resources. So now Lisa will give you an overview of the science plan to inform these activities. And we have not yet finalized the plan document, so we're not sharing a document with anyone yet, but we hope to have that available to distribute soon. And in the meantime, wanted to just give you an overview of what the plan entails. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa.
Thanks, Lila. So as Lila mentioned, scientists from the Northwest Fisheries Science Center, Southwest Fisheries Science Center, and West Coast region have collaboratively developed this strategic science plan to guide our research and investments over the next 5 to 10 years in this new area of scientific understanding for NOAA fisheries on the West Coast. This plan is intended to be a living document and to be adaptive to new scientific advancements, newly identified needs, the priorities of the federal government, our partners, and stakeholders. The plan focuses on the West Coast, as our data and research needs will be quite specialized to the West Coast. The focus is also on things that we don't know, on understanding the potential impacts of offshore wind on NIMS trust resources, and on supporting the development of strategies to mitigate impacts. So it's not necessarily a laundry list of all of the scientific issues associated with offshore wind, but it's specific to the East Coast, to the West Coast, and specific to NIMS. It focuses on areas of special expertise and scientific capacity unique to NOAA fisheries. There are other agencies and other scientific organizations that have their own areas of comparative advantage, but NOAA fisheries, with its many decades of experience providing science-based conservation and management for sustainable fisheries, marine mammals, endangered species, and their habitats, will be looked to as a leader in those areas. We've really taken an ecosystem approach to the development of this plan, where we consider impacts from the sea to the shore, everything from the physical infrastructure, construction, operations, maintenance, and port activities, interactions among those many activities, and the aspects of the marine ecosystem. Some of these are illustrated in this diagram from the Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Group. And this ecosystem approach really guides the development of the plan. There are 6 focus areas and research priorities identified for each of these focus areas. I'm going to give brief overviews of each of the research priorities in each focus area, And you'll get to know more about each of the priorities when we release the written version of the plan. But for now, we'll just do kind of an overview. So the first focus area is habitat impacts. The development of offshore wind energy will place new infrastructure in the ocean. This can have different types of impacts on habitats, which we seek to understand. The priority research areas for us are creating atlases of habitats important for NIMS trust resources that can be used in spatial planning and to inform data collection needs. To understand the potential impacts on atmospheric wind fields and related ecosystem processes, including upwelling, surface currents, mesoscale fronts and eddies formation, nutrient supply, temperature, and primary productivity. We want to quantify the risk to biogenic habitats like corals and sponges, and determine whether the addition of artificial structure alters the suitability of pelagic or benthic habitats. This new infrastructure in the ocean, as well as additional needed vessel traffic, can create stressors that may have physiological and physical impacts on ocean organisms. And this is the second focus area. Our research is going to focus on topics such as noise, impacts on deep sea communities, electromagnetic fields, particularly for West Coast and deep sea species. This is sort of where the research is needed for the West Coast. On whether infrastructure is acting as fish aggregating devices, haul-out structures for pinnipeds, or substrates for invertebrates, and physical interactions between migrating species and infrastructure and vessel traffic. The two focus areas that I just talked about, habitat impacts and physiological and physical effects, can have impacts on the abundance and distribution of different species. And so the priorities in this area include evaluating the risk of direct and indirect entanglement mortality risk on protected species, evaluating the migratory and movement patterns of marine mammals, seabirds, sea turtles, and fish species, evaluating the impacts of spatial distribution and population dynamics, including fish and shellfish larvae, habitat modification, and species aggregations, including their relationships. The potential to alter the population, potential to alter the distribution, demographic structure, or abundance of target fisheries populations, and assessing how these changes may affect population estimates and uncertainty calculated by NIMS stock assessments for fisheries stocks and protected species. Offshore wind energy development will likely have impacts on commercial, recreational, tribal, and subsistence fishing activities, as well as fishing communities for which ocean activities are part of their culture and economy. The fourth focus area are these socioeconomic impacts. Research priorities include creating fishing footprint atlases, assessing fishing effort redistribution, improving fisheries economic impact modeling tools and community vulnerability indices to be optimal for needs related to offshore wind impact evaluation, understanding how port infrastructure development will affect different types of fishing activities, evaluating strategies that may decrease impacts and assess the effectiveness of proposed mitigation efforts, evaluating the potential for offshore wind energy development to affect the cultural identity and fishing heritage of fishing communities, understanding how changes in stock assessment uncertainty may affect fisheries management decisions, and the valuation of non-market ecosystem services. The fifth focus area is ecosystem and climate interactions, which includes the research needed to synthesize these effects identified under the other focus areas, as well as understanding how impacts to individual ecosystem components might interact and result in compounding effects across the ecosystem. Specific priorities to this focus area include developing methods to identify ecosystem changes, conceptual models, and ecosystem indicators, identifying and filling in gaps in understanding entrophic interactions, developing frameworks for quantifying cumulative effects, and developing risk assessment tools that can quantify changes in ecosystem indicators and distinguish between the effects due to offshore wind from effects due to climate variability and climate change. And then the final focus area is on impacts to NIMS scientific surveys. Our surveys are essential for managing our nation's fisheries, promoting the protection and recovery of marine mammals and endangered and threatened species, and conserving coastal and marine habitats and ecosystems for future generations. These surveys overlap with areas that are being considered or have been leased for wind energy. So research priorities in this area include evaluating and quantifying the impacts of wind development on survey operations and on scientific advice to management, the development of new statistical designs, sampling protocols and methods, designing and carrying out calibrations to integrate data from different or new sources, and developing interim indices to bridge the gap in data availability while new approaches are being identified, tested, or calibrated. So I'd also like to point out that there's a set of overarching challenges and opportunities that we outline in the plan. These challenges and opportunities intersect with each of the focus areas and all of the priority topics of research. And they include integrating regional data infrastructure, characterizing baseline conditions, disentangling the effects of offshore wind energy development from changes due to climate variability and climate change, and developing research methods that can accommodate future scenarios of cumulative offshore wind energy development. But the opportunities here are also substantial. They include the co-use of platforms for fine resolution, long-term data collection to answer long-standing research questions, the integration of novel monitoring schemes, and using offshore infrastructure itself to mitigate the loss of survey sampling locations, all while contributing to the decarbonization of the energy sector. Thanks for your attention. Again, this plan focuses on data and research needs for the West Coast in areas of scientific expertise that are unique to NOAA fisheries. We really intend this plan to be kind of the start of our conversation about science needs and put forward the questions we need to ask to develop the science needed to understand the impacts better. In the next few minutes, we welcome your thoughts and hearing about your research priorities. And a reminder that this is a living document that NOAA Fisheries is intending to revisit periodically to take into account new information or new needs. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure Lila and Blake can help with that.
Thanks, Lisa, for that. Carrie, do we want to open it up to questions from the committee members at this time?
Yeah, let's do that. And then if there's time, then we can open it up to non-MPC members. Mike Okoneski's hand, first one up.
Thank you for the presentation, Lisa. Can you hear me okay, Carrie?
Sure can.
Okay. Having seen your work before, Lisa, I must say it gives me a little more confidence about who's behind some of the analysis. I've been impressed with what you've done in the past. The one thing I guess that I'm not hearing in here, maybe you said it and I missed it, but is the economic study of the importance of fishing to our nation, both that maybe you wouldn't do a food security thing, but somebody I think should. And the other part of it is just the pure economics, which, as I read it, is the total contribution, and you have to separate out the imported side, but it's very important. It contributes something like $138 billion, the last I read, to the economy and the gross national product, I believe. I'm not an economist. But also there's 1.1 million jobs involved. And so I guess, is there going to be some kind of regional impact study if, say, we reduce down fisheries by different levels, 25%, 50%, or 75%, something like that? I'm not suggesting any one thing. I'm just asking if there's a plan. That's my first question. Knowing what you said about studying for upwelling, and it sounded like the other hydrological effects on hydrology that could happen, are you taking it to the next step and saying, or analyzing what effects that'll have on the ecosystem, the living ecosystem, the phytoplankton and different plankton regimes that might pop up differently, water temperature and nutrients and that kind of thing? Or at least categorizing that or cataloging it as a data gap that needs attention. And that's my second one. And the third one is probably way outside of your area, but as I understand, China, as I'm reading about China, they're putting together enough coal plants in 2 or 3 years to probably about double what we're going to do on the West and East Coast for offshore wind. And if we're increasing carbon emissions by that level, how much impact are we going to have on being able to control what happens with climate change? I mean, there's a lot being given up, in my mind anyway, and a lot of people's minds, with this offshore wind pilgrimage, and yet we don't know much about it as far as what the final cost will be to the consumer, and the list goes on and on. The environmental side, of course, is another big one. So anything you can do to wrestle with those, if you can't answer it, I just say can't answer it. But anyway, those are my concerns that I can get stated in a brief period of time. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'll try to remember those 3 questions. For the first one on economic impacts, NOAA Fisheries just released the economic impacts of the fisheries economics of the United States, which is a report that they do every few years, and talks about exactly those pieces that you mentioned, like puts together the overall contribution to the economy of fisheries in different regions. And so I think that pretty much covers that question. You can look at it by your region. We on the West Coast have models that are developed specifically for looking at regional impacts to West Coast fisheries, and so those can certainly be used, although they're not appropriate for assessing trade-offs and things like that. They just identify kind of the economic footprint of commercial fisheries or recreational fisheries on the West Coast or on subregions of the West Coast. So for your second question on kind of upwelling and the downstream impacts of upwelling, All of these focus areas are very related, are kind of interwoven. So lots of things in different focus areas affects lots of things in other focus areas. And so it is really meant to be an integrated ecosystem look at impacts. But you sort of have to start somewhere. And so starting with the modeling of kind of the physical impacts is generally where people start, and then use results from those models to drive changes in other kind of biological models. Although because you're using two types of modeled input, the uncertainty increases drastically. So that's kind of something that you have to remember. And then in terms of China, China's also a leader in, they have the most installed and operational capacity of offshore wind, and are targeting the most growth out of any country in the world. So I think, you know, their economy is growing very rapidly, and you know, I don't know how much you want to get into it, but the United States has emitted much more carbon than China has over its entire history. And so it is really our responsibility to do anything and everything that we can to, you know, climate change is really, really bad. And the ecosystem impacts, the signal from climate change is going to be much stronger than any other signal. And we know that now as scientists. And so, you know, there are certainly trade-offs to think about, and there are details to think about. But you know, it's an administrative priority to reduce carbon emissions in the United States.
Well, thank you. Can I come back with just a brief follow-up? I guess one important, you mentioned trade-offs, and I'm not sure in the economic trade-offs, and the only thing I can imagine there is, like, for fisheries is, okay, we lose a population of people fishing, and we lose processing plants, and we lose infrastructure that takes fish to market. Is it going to be that kind of trade-off? Are you going to trace it down the line, or is it just going to be, well, there's fishermen that are going to lose their jobs? And just real quick, at least as far as the stock market's concerned, I think China is struggling with their economy right now. And part of the reason, as I understand, is that they don't have enough electricity. You are right, though. I know that much, that they are leading the world, I think, as a single country. But they want power any way they can get it. They're short of electricity, is why they're still going as fast as they can in any way direction they can, including coal. And India is coming on strong as well, and especially for coal for them. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Lisa. Lisa, I have just a couple of questions. Of the 6 focus areas that were identified, how are those being prioritized, if they're being prioritized? And then what timeframes are envisioned for starting and then completing this work? This is especially important given that we're expecting to see some form of construction and operations plan submitted by some of the lessees off California as early as late 2026 or early 2027.
Yeah, thanks. I'll talk about the time frame first. Lots of these projects, maybe not lots, many of these projects have been started already. So, you know, as you may know, I'm working on the Fishing Footprint Atlas. They're working on habitat mapping. There's a whole bunch of projects that have been started already. So this is definitely, you know, becoming part of our scientific work at the Northwest and Southwest Fisheries Science Centers. The timeline of this plan is a bit rough, like we're sort of thinking 5 to 10 years, although under the understanding that things will move and change and perhaps be prioritized differently. In terms of how we're prioritizing them, there's no direct prioritization within or among these within the focus areas. It's often like, who are the scientists that are involved with the offshore wind science team, and what do they specialize in, and what do they want to work on, and what can we get funding to work on? So that helps to prioritize. And it's also helpful, like part of the development of this plan involved talking with scientists at the West Coast region and understanding what they need to know to do their evaluations of the regulatory and management, like the EIS type documents. So are there things that we need to focus on to help them do their evaluations of the EIS?
Perfect. Thanks for that. Corey Niles.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, Lisa, you kind of got to it with in exchange with Mike O, but you mentioned on the economics building new tools, but I guess I'm wondering about what could be done in terms of collecting more data on the economics. You can model things without having data, but like you kind of pointed out some of the limitations of input-output models. But have you if there was no such thing as limited resources on data collection, like would there be new data collection ideas you guys have thought of?
Yeah, good question. We're pretty well set up to answer the types of questions that have been asked before that relate to fisheries management, right? But not that relate to something so broad as ocean space management. That's not really something that NOAA Fisheries has sort of tackled in the past. So I guess, one thing that has come up is that the data on recreational fisheries is pretty sparse. So that could be one area of investment. But I think in the broader sense, BOEM is really the agency that is supposed to be understanding the, kind of the high level trade-offs. And so we can contribute information and ideas for modeling, but we're not actually in the place to kind of do it ourselves. So that's what we've been focusing on, is how do we provide the best information and provide guidance on how to use that information for more broad scale modeling. So if I weren't part of NOAA Fisheries, I may have different ideas on what data needs to be collected. But that's sort of outside of our scope, if that makes sense.
You good, Corey?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Lisa.
All right. I don't see any questions from any other MPC members. Given that we still have 15 minutes on this. Oh, nope, we do. Corey, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was one. I got what might sound like a dumb question, but Lisa, on your conceptual diagram thing, I feel like I don't get out as much from those as I could, just thinking through what they mean to you all. But so to ask it in a kind of a dumb way, why are there turbines? Why are there two images of turbines on there twice? And can you walk through what you all see that diagram helping us with?
Why are there two different images of turbines in the figure? That's what you're asking?
Yeah, and well, that's just a way of saying, can you walk through what
Yeah, sure.
what you see?
So I think it's actually just a way to facilitate the arrows without having it be too messy. But the idea is that the turbines have the potential to impact the physical aspects of the ocean ecosystem directly through, changes in wind speed, perhaps behind the turbines. Does that affect upwelling? Does that then affect nutrients and temperature? So those kind of physical aspects of the ocean. Those aspects then have the potential to affect the biological aspects of the ocean ecosystem. But the wind turbines may also affect those biological aspects directly. So, perhaps the population kind of avoids the area of the turbines, goes around them, and so it changes their kind of migration patterns. Or maybe a fish species is attracted to the area under a turbine because it's sort of like a fad, and so it changes the distribution and maybe the abundance. And so it's just kind of showing the different pathways of direct and indirect impacts. And then, of course, the impacts to fisheries and social economic changes of people kind of on the land, both directly and indirectly.
You good,
Does
Corey?
that get at it?
Yeah, thanks. I keep losing my mute button. Okay, yeah, thank you. That's helpful to hear you think through that.
All right, Carrie, since there's no other NPC members with hands up, should we open it up? Oh, never mind. Might go.
Lisa, if I heard those time schedules right, as far as what Mike Conroy said, and I mean, we'd be producing power before this from offshore wind before this survey or analysis that you're doing is complete. Is that my take? Is that right?
Well, this doesn't define one analysis. This defines a program of research for the next 5 to 10 years. And we can't know everything that's identified in this plan without physical kind of monitoring of actual installed offshore wind. So this plan is certainly intended to evolve as we understand more, but we can't know everything before the installation of any offshore wind, for example. And we never do. I mean, we never do. We don't know everything before we take fisheries management actions either. There's all sorts of things that we do with imperfect knowledge, but with the understanding that we'll continue to learn and adapt and hopefully improve with time.
If I may, the fishing regulations don't go into effect after you start the fishery that you're dealing with. And in this case, the action is taking place possibly before you get your research done. I know you need something to look at to get a really, some empirical data, but So if California was the first one up to the plate and they get a few of these things out there, would you then concentrate quite a bit of research equipment on those turbines and take a look at them as they're starting them up and everything, and get the empirical data that way, or how would that work?
That's certainly the intention. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Third try at opening it up to questions from non-NPC members, if there are any. I see two hands, but I can't see who they are, so stand by. Larry, go ahead. Larry, then Alan.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Roger that.
All right. Good morning. I had forgotten about this meeting. I'm glad Michael called me up and reminded me. So I did get on a little bit late. I wanted to say I appreciated Lisa's stitching together of the potential effects of offshore wind development regarding, the displacement potentially of fisheries and the economic impacts, socioeconomic impacts of that. The idea that the developments may bear with them effects on our ecosystem dynamics. The idea that if that is true, that if there's an affected biological effect, that then can also affect the productivity of the ocean and thereby the fisheries successes as well. And then the idea that the turbines, the structures themselves may present some sort of alteration of the environment. I appreciated that stitching together. But that said, I'm concerned about a few things. One, relative to critical habitat, the NCOS model had some considerations of critical habitat and the creatures that are covered by the critical habitat, but there was little recognition in my mind of what that means to have a critical habitat in place and what the development may mean to that critical habitat. And Lisa pointed out noise was something that she mentioned. Migration was something that she mentioned that could potentially be altered. And I just harken back to the with a critical habitat designation that any activity that may affect mitigation of the species or the forage of the species, or noise that may impact their behavior, or water quality are supposed to be fundamental considerations on whether the development does or doesn't affect the critical habitat in a serious way. So I would like to see a little more emphasis on what the critical habitat designation actually means and where it is and how it relates to the developments. I appreciated that you mentioned EMF as one also factors that we need to look into. I didn't hear anything, at least from what I heard or remember, about avian species and potential blade collisions. I'd like to see more about that, especially for protected species such as, we know, the short-tailed albatross. I'm curious, and I keep harking back to the idea of what does BOEM's recommendations and research mean to BOEM as it moves through its timelines and product expectations, the development of product expectations. And it seems to me that so far we've seen that where there's been often some research and recommendations by NOAA, that BOEM hasn't really taken that into serious consideration as marched on regardless. And I refer specifically, and it's been referred to before, the June 2022 statement by NOAA on the Oregon calls originally, and it said prior to identifying the wind energy areas, potential effects to oceanographic processes must be considered, including effects from the wind turbine structures themselves. And it goes on to talk about oceanographic effects from the extraction of energy from the atmosphere, and what would that effect then be on upwelling processes, and that NIMS expressed concern about that at that time. And yet, BOEM has gone ahead, despite that recommendation and the use of the word must, and moved ahead with its arbitrary timeline, at least in my mind. So I'd like to understand better how NOAA considers from their point of view how their research and their recommendations fit into what BOEM decides to do with it. And then just one more thing, so that's a question. And then relative to trade-offs, and again, I go back to where Lisa kind of stitched these things together, you know, from displacement to ecosystem effects to upwelling to specific turbine causation of effects. That the trade-offs need to include all of those factors. And one of the things that's fundamentally missing, it seems to me, and I don't remember too much reference by Lisa to cumulative impacts. You know, the BOEM continues to look at impacts from what I've seen, development by development, not even really state by state, yet we need to be looking at coastwide and over potential impacts over time. So those are a few comments I have, and some questions built into those comments. Thanks.
Lisa, do you want me to? Oh,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was gonna ask you to address our role, I
Okay.
guess.
Yeah. Hi, Larry. So with regards to the birds, so U.S. Fish and Wildlife manages birds. So we did not address them in the plan. Perhaps, Carrie, maybe you could get somebody, maybe somebody from U.S. Fish and Wildlife would like to talk about what they do with birds and offshore wind at some point for the MPC. But yeah, we don't manage them, so they're not part of this plan. And then you asked about how does NOAA consider how our research fits in with what BOEM decides to do with that. Well, again, that's a question for BOEM. But we do talk with them, and you know, they've funded NOAA Fisheries under several of their environmental studies program studies. So yeah, I mean, we do work with them on some of these joint priorities. The plan did include cumulative impacts, and Lisa may want to speak to that a little bit more. But again, it's just focusing on some of the science and not what BOEM would do with that. Of course, we can, you know, like Lisa said, we provide a lot of this science to BOEM, and then we provide our comments on some of their NEPA documents and so forth. But again, how BOEM structures their documents is a question for BOEM. And then on the critical habitat, so that wasn't, the plan does focus on habitat, but critical habitat is a regulatory designation. So the plan is not looking at things under a regulatory designation. You know, the plan is just looking at habitat in general. And then we can use that information, that research in our consultations and in our work that, like, for instance, to designate critical habitat or to look at the impacts on critical habitat. But I hope that helps. And then Lisa, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, great job. Thanks.
Thanks, Lila and Lisa. Alan, we got time for your question. Elena, we might not have time for your question, depending upon how quick Alan's question is.
Okay, can you hear me, Mike?
Roger that.
So my one concern I want to identify here is I listened to your list of possible impacts, and I want to make sure that you are aware, because this is an experimental technology, and the mooring systems that are most talked about are these ones that have synthetic ropes going down to chain at the bottom. That necessarily means that there's going to be, to some extent, nearly continuous sedimentation, suspension of sediment in the water column. If each turbine has 3 mooring cables, and I suspect they're going to wind up using 5 to get at least some redundancy. And those chains with the swell are tending to lift and possibly move as current changes. The bottom of the ocean at that depth is not experiencing any kind of scouring action like that on a relatively continuous basis. And what you're going to have is not only scour at the bottom, but you're going to have these plumes of sediment traveling around with the current, which I would think would discourage, fish near the bottom and possibly cover things that you would possibly want to protect with, additional sediment fallout. So I just want to make sure that you realize the extent to which that could possibly be an impact, seeing as there's never been this kind of deep water mooring system before.
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely be a part of the review of the review and consultation process once developers have their construction operation plans and can identify what moorings that they're using and how many and how big they'll be and all that kind of stuff. You need those parameters to be able to understand the scale of scour, for example.
Thanks for that, Lisa. Elena, we'll come back to you after we get the next presentation done, since we're kind of falling behind on the agenda, so I apologize. Perfect. Lila, do you want to introduce Blake?
Sure.
And yeah, just real quick, for those of you who are attending this, if you could just in the chat type your name and your affiliation just for our record keeping, that would be much appreciated. And now, Lila, I'm sorry, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Blake, do you want to go ahead and share your slides in the meantime? I'll get started. So Kelly Andrews wasn't able to make it today. So Blake Feist is joining us. Thank you, Blake, for stepping in. Blake is a landscape ecologist with the Northwest Fishery Science Center. He's also on the California Current Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Team. And as you know, NMFS and ODFW jointly provided fisheries data layers and recommendations to BOEM for the NCOS model used in Oregon. And Kelly and Blake were integral to that partnership effort, pulling together data and developing the methods. And so today, Blake is here to talk about that and what we're going to be doing for California too. Blake, do you want to go ahead to the next slide? Let's see. Okay, thank you. So we're preparing for siting off of California. As you know, California's AB 525 Offshore Wind Strategic Plan. The draft came out recently, so we anticipate that it would be finalized sometime this year. And that plan, of course, identifies suitable sea space for more offshore wind development. And so NIMS is working on fisheries footprints now in anticipation of the state of California and BOEM eventually looking at siting options and potentially using the NOAA NCOS spatial model again for part of that. And so, we're preparing for that, and we would be building off the methods used by NIMS and ODFW in our joint analysis for the fisheries layers that were used in the Oregon NCOS model. And again, as a reminder, Kelly and Blake and I worked on that with Justin Ainsworth, Karen Braby, Delia Kelly, and Jessica Watson at ODFW. So Jessica, by the way, as we go through this, feel free to jump in if you want to make any supporting comments or clarifications. So today Blake is going to be reviewing the fisheries data and methods that we used in that Oregon model and discuss our preliminary thinking about how to do this for California. We've gone through some of the MPC and Pacific Fishery Management Council comments from the Oregon model. And so we'll touch on how we've addressed some of those where we could. And also we're going to be interested in hearing your thoughts and suggestions on that and some of the other areas where we might have some questions for you. So at the end of the presentation, we're going to open it up for that discussion. Next slide, please. So again, a reminder on the layers that NIMS provided to the Oregon NCOS model. We provided 4 different data layers. The fisheries layer was joint with NIMS and ODFW, contributing to that analysis and those recommendations. And then NIMS also provided data layers for our scientific surveys, habitat, and protected resources. Not birds, but whales and sea turtles. Okay, so for this presentation, we're just going to be focusing on the fisheries layer. Next slide, please. And so the model was used to identify potential conflicts between offshore wind energy development areas and West Coast fisheries. And so NIMS and ODFW worked together to determine what data could best represent the space used by fisheries. And so what metrics, what fisheries, and what years of data did we have? So Blake's gonna cover that and also, kind of what we're thinking in terms of preparing the footprints for fisheries off of California. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to you, Blake.
Thank you, Lila, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here, everyone, and thanks for having me. Can you hear me speaking?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, I know many of the people on this call have heard about this modeling effort that we did off of Oregon, but just to remind people, there's kind of 2 key questions that we're trying to address in these analyses. Number 1, how much fishing occurs at a specific location, and number 2, which is more important, what are the next best locations to fish and earn income if these good locations become off limits owing to wind farm development. Very briefly, in Oregon, we looked at about 9 different sectors or species, which are shown on the left there, which included at-sea and shoreside hake, various representations of groundfish, bottom trawl, fixed gear pot, fixed gear longline, pink shrimp, Dungeness, and then commercial and charter versions of albacore. The idea behind all these modeling efforts is to always use the best available data sources to accurately map and represent fishing activity. That's the number 1 priority in developing these heat maps. And so first of all, we use geolocations of where fishing tow lines and pot strings are actually set whenever possible. And to do that, we use NIMS Observer Program and electronic monitoring data. And we also leverage state, federal, and PACFIN logbook data. And then we get the revenue to assign the value to these individual tow lines and pot strings based on PACFIN fish tickets. And then in Oregon, the time span was roughly between 2002 2021, but it varied a bit depending on sector and species. And I'm not going to get into the gory details on that in the interest of time. So there's kind of two general problems with these data that we have to struggle with. Problem number one is that the distributions of these spatially explicit fisheries activity data are notoriously skewed with long tails of low activity, shown on the right there, punctuated by far fewer high intensity locations. And the problem with this is that it tends to de-emphasize the true footprint of a given fishery. It's particularly problematic for question number two. What are the next best locations to fish if you no longer fish and the areas have become off limits potentially to a wind farm development? Key question number one you can do without any problem with the distributions of the data. But number two is the real rub. And the solution that we came up with was to rank transform the raw data to account for the inherent distributional problems in the data. Problem number two then is, well, how are you going to actually measure the fishery activity intensity and which one's most representative? And we had two options in the table: effort and hours fished, or the revenue or the amount of money associated with each individual fishing event. And it's important the problem is that we had effort and revenue are correlated, but not perfectly. So we decided to incorporate both measures of fishing activity as a combined metric. And so that solution then is to normalize each of the ranked metric between 0 and 1. And then between those two options, select the highest normalized value between effort or revenue. And I'll kind of walk through this schematically to show you exactly what that means. So let's take an example for the Coos Bay call area, starting with effort. I'm going to zoom in on just 4 grid cells to really make this as close to being on the ground as possible. You can see the amount of effort expressed in hours for each of those 4 grid cells. And then we rank those efforts from roughly 1 to 1200 for this area. And then we want to convert those ranked numbers into just going from 0 to 1. And you can see how that gets converted into a normalized effort for those 4 grid cells. We're going to repeat this process for the revenue. I'm not going to step you through each step, but at the end of that, you end up again with a normalized revenue value for each of those grid cells. And then once you have both of those in hand, you take that normalized effort that goes from 0 to 1, you overlay it with the normalized revenue that goes from 0 to 1. And then when you're done, you want to choose the highest value between those two options, effort or revenue, and that becomes your combined effort and revenue composite map shown on the top layer there. So if you kind of drill through, say, the upper left-hand grid cell, you can see it's 0.9 for effort and 0.987 for revenue. And so that higher normalized revenue value gets carried forward. And that's true for all the grid cells in the analysis area for these heat maps. Once you've done that, you can then repeat this process for each of the 9 sectors or fisheries that we looked at. And they want to be able to combine and calculate a suitability score across all these 9 fishery sectors. And we did that by just using the geometric mean. And that gives you your suitability score for each of the grid cells for each of the across this area for all the call areas. With that, the combined fishery submodel, I use this ranked importance, and that's what the map looked like when we were done. On the right, you've got relative suitability as being very red means it's not very suitable for offshore wind development, whereas blue means it's more suitable for offshore wind development. I mean, there's less activity, obviously, and it kind of shows that gradient across the 2 call areas off of Oregon. And then for the application of fisheries footprints, the good news is that BOEM actually used these data and how we analyze them to spatially across all the other submodels. And then the final wind energy areas shown in the dark black on this map is what they actually settled on for the draft wind energy areas. So that it was helpful, I think, in the decision-making process to reduce those call areas down to the WIAs that you see now based on the information we gave them on commercial fishery activity in those areas. So how are we going to build off of our experiences from this modeling that we did in Oregon and then apply that in California? Kind of key points here is that we plan on using a similar modeling framework, but it's important to note that California is a completely different place. It has different fisheries, and it has different sources of monitoring data for us to work with. And we've also had some time to think about and improve or expand on the models that we developed off Oregon, which is very helpful. So to kind of point out the key differences, even though we're going to have a similar model structure, instead of having just 2 different measures of fishing intensity like we did in Oregon, effort and ex-vessel revenue, now we're going to add in tons of landed fish or amount of protein, essentially, is another way of looking at it, and then select across those 3 to come up with our composite score of suitability. The time period is going to vary. It's going to be much wider for these analyses. For example, in the Oregon analyses, we were limited to revenue data only between 2011 and 2020 from an existing project. But in California, the revenue time spans will equal the effort and the tons landed time spans wherever possible for all the species and sectors and that we're looking at. And then lastly, we're going to be looking at the same species and fisheries that we use in Oregon, plus there are going to be many more, which is shown on this table here. The red rectangles in this table shows you the species and sectors that we looked at for Oregon. And then it also outlines the years that were covered for Oregon, which is 2002 to 2021. And then now we're expanding this out to what we like to do for our analyses in California. You can see we've added quite a few additional species. And we also trying to add as many years as possible to represent the fishery over time more adequately off the coast of California. And again, the yellowed areas in there are years that are available for a given species or sector that we're aware of, but we're taking feedback if there's fisheries or sectors we've missed or information that we've missed. So at this point, I kind of want to open up to a discussion and use this as kind of a point of reference for that discussion. Lila kindly pulled together some of the key comments that the MPC made on the previous Oregon model, shown in the left-hand column there. And the right-hand column is what we're considering for California to address some of those comments that we got from the MPC in the past. So we'd love to kind of open up the floor to have a discussion about what people are thinking about these previous comments and feedback you might have on what we plan on doing off the coast of California.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Blake. And I also put in the chat the links to the two letters, the MPC letter and the council letter, if that's helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Lila. Thanks, Blake. I'll start off with a couple of questions. One of the, and I don't want to say complaints, but one of the concerns expressed with regard to the exercise off Oregon was that it was limited to the areas that were identified as call areas. When you're doing this for California, you're going to be looking at it coast-wide, or are you going to be limiting it to the areas that have been identified as suitable by the Energy Commission?
Great question. I'm glad you asked it. It's almost like I planted a seed. We're going to be doing both. So if you look at the third from the bottom comment from the MPC to evaluate the entire coast, considerations that we're thinking about are what we're going to do is that we're going to be developing our fishing heat maps coast-wide as best we can to account for effects that are occurring locally, i.e. the port level or community level, and also cumulatively across the coast. So for example, in a given wind farm area, you can say this is the proportion of revenue or the proportion of effort across the entire West Coast or across California that is coming from that wind farm area. Or you can say this is how much ports that are landing fishing activity from that area will be affected. So we can get both at community level, port level impacts, and then cumulatively across the entire West Coast. And also like to point out that it can be used for looking at activities outside of wind farms, namely cabling routes and other infrastructure associated with wind farms that may occur outside a given wind farm footprint.
Perfect. Thanks for that. And I'm glad looking at this table that's on screen now, you kind of addressed my next question, and I would hope that, prioritizing getting that recreational data, whether it's from private vessels or charter boats, is prioritized as well, because along the North Coast, that's an important consideration. And then my final question before handing it off to Jessica, in your prior slide, you had indicated the sectors and years being analyzed. Will there be efforts to do outreach to local communities to see which fisheries may be missing? For example, under other HMS, I'm envisioning that, bluefin might be something that is considered, which leads into my final sort of observation question. We're seeing bluefin show up in areas where they haven't recently, particularly along the North Coast. So how does the absence of historical dependence on specific areas factor in, given that we expect future dependence upon these areas for fisheries as they expand their range either due to changing ocean conditions or recovery of the stock, particularly with regard to bluefin?
Also, an excellent question. Thanks for asking that. In terms of communities, we do have the capability in the modeling, since we have direct links to the fish tickets. We can say something about community impacts. It can become kind of challenging for a suitability model to do that, but it can be kind of a sub-model or ancillary analyses that you might undergo. And with regard to kind of future changes in the distributions of fish species, that's also an important issue. And it's not something that's being addressed here necessarily, because currently Kelly has people working on developing models that'll look at future distributions of the fish species that are being targeted and how that would be affected potentially by wind farms moving forward. So that's kind of a next step after these initial analyses, is to fully incorporate future distributions where the fish are expected to go, and with the potential to have modeling looking at potentially where fishing activity would go as a result. Does that help?
Yeah, that's stupidly helpful, and I appreciate that.
Hey, Mike, can I add something here?
No,
Please.
of course you can.
So with regards to the you asked about like looking at coastwide, are we only going to look at, you know, the areas that the coastal or the CEC analyze? We're just preparing the maps right now, and then, you know, we'll have them ready to go once there is an end cost model or, you know, a proposal, whether it's from CEC or BOEM. So there is no model right now, and there's nothing that we are working on with any other agency. We are just preparing the layers so that we'll have them ready to go, depending on, you know, what area ends up becoming a call area or whatever. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, it does. I think between what you and Blake had to say, I got a good picture of that. So thanks.
Okay.
Jessica, then Corey.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Blake. Thanks, Lila. I just want to, one more clarifying point. I think it's important when we use the term coast-wide, what we're talking about here, some clarification on, is that California coast-wide or West coast-wide? I heard the two terms used interchangeably, and I just want to make sure we're clear on what coast-wide is meaning in this context. So that's my first question, Blake.
Sure. Yeah. In the terms of our analyses that we're doing right now, the data we have in hand, coastwide is going to mean Oregon and California. I personally have data from a different project that's coastwide for economic analyses between 2011 and 2020. So we can make some statements about proportions potentially lost across the coast in a given call area that occurs anywhere. But for the terms of these analyses, we're kind of going to be targeting California and Oregon as being more of your coastwide in terms of where fishing activity is occurring. And we're hoping to account for transboundary issues between the states. For example, fishing that occurs in California but is landed in Oregon and vice versa, to avoid any kind of confusion about where fishing is occurring and where the benefits of that fishing is being landed. Does that help?
Yep, great. Thanks for that. And then if you can go back one slide really quickly, I just wanted to add
Yep.
one clarification here. So the red boxes show the 9 fisheries that were actually included in the fisheries submodel, but just so everyone on the line is clear, we did consider CPS, but it was inshore, and also salmon and Pacific halibut, but understanding that those two, as well as just generally recreational fisheries, didn't have the spatial data available to be brought into the model. So I just want to make it clear that in Oregon, we did look at all of those fisheries, and really it was the spatial component that made it so we didn't include them necessarily in that modeling, but they were looked at. So just wanted to clarify there. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Corey.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Couple questions, Blake. Somewhat similar to Mike's question about bluefin. I brought this up with Lila before, but thinking of Northern California in particular, and the groundfish fisheries are pretty economically depressed compared to what they used to be or could be. You know, at sea whiting is like prohibited from processing down there. And the shoreside whiting hasn't been active for a long time. But so, have you guys thought about a way of mapping fisheries potential? You know, there is some hope that Dover sole markets will grow, and those could be important fishing grounds, more important than they are now. Which is kind of getting to what Tim's question in the chat about how do you show trends or over time, or if differences in importance over time. And I'm also thinking now, when we did the Washington Marine Spatial Plan, we looked at the groundfish EFH maps that NOAA produced as habitat for these species. So that's is there a way you guys can get at potential importance of fishing grounds? Is kind of the question, and trends over time there. And a second, can you just repeat how you're doing the next, like, if this area was taken away, what's the next best area? Can you just repeat how you're all doing that?
Just by normalizing and transforming the data, it kind of emphasizes areas more that may not be fished heavily, and makes it more obvious which are the next best areas if you happen to take out some of the best areas in a given wind farm area, if that makes sense.
Okay, yeah, I think so.
It's a data transformation thing. If you don't do it, you end up kind of just favoring the most intensely fished areas, and then you miss an enormous amount of area that's actually cumulatively fished a fair amount. It's because the distributions are so tremendously skewed. This is why we have that problem. And so by transforming the data, you then emphasize those areas as being as important as they actually are. In terms of trends over time, that's something that we've been discussing a lot about. And if I zip forward a little bit here, because that was a comment from the MPC, suggests better representation of temporal variability. And we thought about potentially looking at effort and tons landed and value, characterizing how much it varies, looking at variance or coefficient of variance. And that would be like a metric of how much variability occurs, but we're still struggling with how you'd actually convert that into a suitability. For example, if an area has higher variance, does that make it more or less suitable? So we're kind of struggling with that. And then in terms of looking at the fact that I think you're talking about groundfish, it used to be heavily fished and were a much more lucrative fishery a long time ago. We do have longer time series data, potentially going back into the 80s, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lila. So we could look at sort of a historical, well, this is the way it was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And if that happened again, that's the implications you might have for these fisheries if they were to recover. I think, is that kind of what you're getting at with the groundfish, at least?
Yeah, and the other way coming at it maybe would be to maybe a different project, but would be to look at those the EFH maps that were done. Carrie probably remembers those well, to just using bottom trawl survey data, I think, to what are the most important habitats for Dover sole, for example, and even if they're not fished, you have some indication that it could be important fishing grounds.
Yeah, that could be like an additional layer, if you will, because the EFH maps are pretty coarse. They're kind of just large zones, if I recall, that are considered important, right?
I think they're more like I think they're pretty fine scale in terms of like species distribution type model type stuff that I don't understand. But yeah, I'd look.
Well,
Okay.
Corey, we're also.
I can jump.
Sorry, Blake.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say we're also pulling
just
together the habitat data as well, but so I guess in the habitat maps, maybe it would get at some of that, Corey, but it's not, we don't have it like tied to the fisheries layer. But I guess, we could look at that.
Just food for thought comment. We can discuss it. Yeah.
Can I say something? Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. I think you're probably talking about two different maps. One is the sort of widely published like EFH conservation area maps that we have for groundfish. But I think Corey was referring to the Habitat Utility Database, which is a model-based mapping exercise that looks at, probable habitat suitability for a suite of groundfish species, and that was used to inform the last groundfish EFH review. Those are, buried in the bowels of the EIS somewhere. But anyway, I think, and those are much more fine scale, but, we don't have those posted on our website. They're not published as, those aren't the actual EFH or EFH
Right.
conservation.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. I have seen those habitat suitability maps. Kurt Whitmer, I think, developed those. So yeah, I'm familiar with those. And I forgot how they were used to feed into EFH designations. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Exactly. And those may be refreshed and improved in the not too distant future.
I think there were two versions, Carrie, right? There was one that NCOS did and then one that Kurt must have done.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was just thinking of the Kurt Whitmire, Joe Bizarro habitat utility database.
All right, Corey, you good?
Yeah, thanks.
Roger that. Micah, you got about a minute.
Okay. Basically, I don't hear it mentioned much more, but the second element that I haven't heard in the conversation for a long time is what impacts it'll have on the processors. Because most fishermen, at least on industrial scale, do not market their own fish or take it to market. But markets are fickle things, and if they get dependence or consistency problems, they'll move to other fish. So they make sure their shelves are always full at the retail stores. But the point is I think you better start planning on what the processor needs X amount of dollars going through his plant in order just to operate it year round or operate it at all. And if you start subtracting this or that, that could be a non-starter. So I think in the economic side, maybe you want to talk to some processors and just find out where those points are, or as close as you can, because without the processor, things are going to be a lot different for these heavy duty fishermen. And whiting is one of the big ones for sure. It's a very carefully laid out plan on who's going to fish where, which plants, move them around if they have to, and that kind of thing. It's not just, I got fish. They call in the crew and they come get the fish and process it. The same thing with the marketing side. You've got to have a consistency or plan, or they're not going to talk to you. So I think you don't quite understand how complex the whole thing is, but it is complex. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
So no, thanks for that comment. I think we have processor data, but we can definitely, I'll make a note here that we should look into this as best we can. I agree with you that it's a very complex thing, and we have not fully accounted for it in the modeling framework that we have here. So I appreciate your comment.
All right, Corey, you'll have the final question on this matter.
No, a couple maybe for discussion later. I think Mike's point is, one, it's how would you turn this analysis around to capture the perspective of the processing plant is an interesting one. Or per discussion later.
Yeah, we can discuss that when we get to that later. All right, Blake, Lila, thank you. Corey, Corey, sorry. Carrie, are we ready to move on to the next?
I think so. I'll check with Nessie. I did elevate her to moderator. Nessie, are you there? And do you want to share your screen, or do you want me to show that
I'm here.
slide?
Can you hear me? Okay. And
Yep,
and
we
I
can
sent
hear
it to you because I was hoping you could share it.
Will do.
Great.
Give me just a second. I will
Well,
put it
good
up.
morning, everyone. Thanks for giving BOEM an opportunity to provide an update. I just have a slide focused on Oregon. And so when that is up, I can start talking about it. Great, thank you, Karen. So I put this out there just, obviously we just want to be as transparent as we can based on the information that we know now. So just to kind of give everyone an opportunity to see what's ahead. This is the projected Oregon schedule, assuming everything goes well at each step of the way. So the next step in the process is for us to issue a proposed sale notice. You're familiar with that document. Obviously, it's going to have a lease package with all the stipulations and including like bidding credits if those are going to be there. It'll also provide like the auction format. And so that is scheduled to be out by the end of this month. And we would also be releasing the draft environmental assessment. And that's also gonna be coming out hopefully at the same time, the end of this month. So those will have their comment period. We're hoping to also schedule a task force in there somewhere. We don't have dates yet that are cast in stone. We'll let you know as soon as we know. And so that goes out for the PSN will be out for a 60-day comment period. We're also starting to work with the state of Oregon on the consistency determination of the federal leasing process. And if all goes well, the final EA is scheduled for July of this year, with the final sale notice being published in a September timeframe. And that is usually out at least 30 days before an auction. And so the auction right now is scheduled for October of 2024. I'll pause and see if there are any questions on the schedule or anything else about Oregon.
Jessica.
Yeah, Nessie, thanks for this. I don't have a question on the timeline per se, but just some clarifications about types of comments that would be appropriate under each one of these upcoming, like the PSN or the draft EA. So is now a good time for that, or should I wait?
Oh, now's a good time.
Okay.
So yeah, the proposed sale notice, I think some of you have worked on California. We're not really reinventing the wheel there too much. So you'll see a lot of the familiar stipulations that was in the California. So, we're seeking comments on anything in the PSN. So that would be really helpful. And then when the draft EA is out, that would also benefit from any comments that you might have.
Yeah, so if I can do a follow-up. Yeah, so the MPC at our last meeting, some of the California leasees presented their survey plans, which included surveys that occur inshore of the leases and are conducted as kind of part of that site characterization process. And so I was just curious, when and where should the MPC be providing comments on the types of surveys that should be included in those site characterization surveys and the potential impacts that would potentially happen from those surveys in that kind of near shore area? And is this, part of the comments that would be useful in the draft EA, the PSN, or both? Or where is the appropriate place for those types of comments?
There are probably folks in Oregon, but I mean, obviously, if it's onshore within state waters, BOEM would not have any jurisdiction over that. But if you want to get a sense for like the types of conditions associated with the surveys, those will be in the lease that would be a part of the proposed sale notice. Does that kind of answer your question?
I think it kind of does. So what I'm hearing is that there'll be, did you say types of surveys described in the PSN. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
No, there are also guidelines, there are survey guidelines that BOEM has posted on our website. Typically they would have, some geotech or other seafloor mapping and surveys. So I'm not sure what you're asking. Like if you want them
Yeah.
to look for a certain thing, then I don't think that's out of line to put that in the comment.
Okay, yeah.
If
So
that's what you're
just to
saying.
clarify that I'm hearing you right, Nessie. So what you're saying is there's these guidelines for some of the surveys, like let's say the geotechnical surveys that would be
Right.
referenced in the PSN. So if there's any comments related to those guidelines, that would be an appropriate place to provide them is in the PSN comment.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate. And really keep in mind that all these plans help to inform the COP. And so if you really want to get very detailed, the BOEM issued a notice of all the information that we need in a COP. So all of this work will be to inform all the things they need to provide in the COP. So really, whatever's in the COP list of requirements is I don't know, that's probably a bit much for you to take a look at now. But at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're looking for. Those are the types of surveys that they would need to do, or types of the information they need to do, and then they would have to do the surveys to provide that information so that we can review them when they submit the COP. But we can have additional discussions, Jessica, if you have more questions on that. But you will see in the PSN that there are survey conditions, and so you can take a look at those, and if you see an area that's kind of missing, then I think a comment for that, or call us if you need further clarification before you put it in a comment too. That's fine also.
Thank you so much.
All right, anybody else from the MPC have any questions specific to the Oregon timeline? I see nothing. Anything else you got, Nessie?
No, I mean, I think the only other thing that's happening there is the programmatic EIS, and so the next thing that will go out would be a draft PEIS, and that's not until hopefully autumn or fall of this year. And we're not doing anything immediate in California, so we won't hit you with anything there in the next few months. Nothing happening in Washington. So I think that's it. I don't have anything else.
Perfect. Thanks. You just sort of answered one of my questions. It was, given the late publication of the AB 525 draft plan, are there plans to come out with additional call areas off California this year, or is that being put off to some point in the future? Or are you unsure as of today?
I think, I would say that we are unsure. I think it's clear that, the state report's going to inform what BOEM does next. The call is the first step in the process, but we are working with the state to make sure that we are aligned in our thinking, and we will do engagement before we put out a call.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that. Anyone else with any questions for Nessie? Well, you may get off easy.
I was just going to say 10 minutes left. All right. Well, thank you so much. We're here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Griffin, what say you now?
Yeah, well, I have a suggestion. Thank you, Nessie. And thank you, Lisa and Blake and Lila, also for your presentations. I think that we'll be able to post the slides from both those NOAA presentations to our website, and I'll get confirmation. I guess I'll look to Lila for confirmation. You can say no. later. And then also the same with the slide from BOEM, I assume it's fine for us to put, we'll add that to this meeting's web page. And if there's any problem with that, you'll let me know. And then since we are 17 minutes ahead of schedule, what about trying to knock off some public comment right now?
Yeah,
Mr. Chair.
I was actually going to suggest that. I know Yelena had a question earlier that we put off because we were running against it. Yelena, do you want to ask your question or make your comment if you're still here? I can't see you.
Can you hear me? Excellent. Thank you so
I
much.
can hear you, yes.
My question was for Lisa on the first presentation about the strategic plan for offshore wind on the West Coast. I'm curious whether there will be any backstop, I'm sorry, and the teeth, as far as if serious impacts have been discovered. Will that initiative imply and include the backstop? Let me know if I need to elaborate.
I can take that question, and I'm not sure anyway if Lisa's still on. But
I
okay.
think she left.
So this is just a science plan. It doesn't have regulatory. It's just the science to inform, all of NMFS's activities and to understand the impacts of offshore wind. Any sort of regulatory matters like that would be handled separately, and also a lot of that is going to be in BOEM's wheelhouse. So yeah, anyway, short answer is the plan does not address.
Thank you, Lila.
Thank you, Lila. Thank you, Yelena. Hey, real quick, if anyone is planning to make public comment on this meeting, either now or at 1 o'clock, can you just use the raise hand feature? It's down under the reaction smiley face. Click on that just to get numbers, and maybe we can knock a couple of those out now. Sometimes we're surprised and not very many people want to comment, but if there's one hand, I'll just give you a minute.
See one hand, Carrie, from Walter.
Yep. Yeah. Mike Walter Chuck, I think is his name. And there's Larry. All right. Well, yeah, not quite as many as I thought. We will circle back to this at the designated time of 2 o'clock. So this isn't your only chance, but since we do have a little bit of time, yeah, why don't we go ahead? I think it's Mike, Walter, Chuck, and then Larry.
Yep.
Peter. Yeah, go ahead and unmute yourself, Mike. And
well, not me. Walter, go ahead.
Fire away.
Okay. Thanks, Susan, for inviting me to this. And, I am a commissioner with the Port of Newport, and I am on the task force. So I'm just kind of listening in as part of that duty of being on that. My question, it's more of a question, is, we have OPAC getting a presentation next week. We have the Governor's Offshore Work Group, and then we have the BOEM Task Force. There's always been a lot of disjointed communications about who is talking to whom and how that information is being sent up to the work task force and in other ways. So we know what everybody's saying to each other. Is there does anybody have an answer for that?
Susan, you want to weigh in? Or Jessica, did you raise your hand to address this?
I did. Hi, Walter. I can at least speak for ODFW's communication role on how we're making sure that ODFW is a part of all those conversations and communicating between. So we have a seat on the task force. We also have, seats on OPAC, and so there, and as you see, seats here on the council. And so we are making sure that there's coordination and communication with regards to ODFW so that we can help facilitate and try and communicate that to anyone who needs additional resources on what's happening where. So just for the ODFW side of things, if you need any information, feel free to reach out to myself and I can direct you to whoever you need to discuss any of these topics with, and I can give you information on that as well.
Thanks, Jessica.
Mike, did you want me to add to that?
If you have some, Dad, Susan, yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Walter. I know it is a lot of convoluted, discussions, and seems like everybody's discussing offshore wind right now. With OPAC meeting on Monday, a lot of what will happen is Department of Land Conservation and Development will be taking on more of that role as the roadmap process gets into gear, which we will be talking about a little bit more this afternoon. So, it is disjointed. The MPC tries to do what it can in the federal fisheries regulation world. We don't have a seat on the task force, but our meetings are open to the public. You're welcome to join anytime, and I can try to keep you updated on when those are. And OPAC tries to do what it can as well. And we rely a lot on Annie Lanier for that, with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So I don't know if that makes anything clearer or muddier, but I think we're all just trying to get a word in wherever we can. And like I said, stick around because we will be talking about that under the Oregon updates.
Oh, thanks, Susan. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Are you good with that, Walter?
No, I'm good with that. Like I said, I see quite a few of the people on here that I interact with, and it's just expressing a little frustration and just want to make sure everybody can know what everybody else is talking about.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And thanks for making the time to attend and participate today. Larry. Larry Thievik. You're muted if you're, oh, there you go.
Yeah, I was trying to unmute. So thanks. I have another meeting this afternoon, so if I was going to say anything, it'd have to be now. I didn't really prepare anything to say. I wanted to follow up briefly on somewhat on what Susan just said. Susan said we try to make comments when we can, and I think it's should be noted that there have been hundreds. There were 1,100 comments, I guess, specific to the WIA designation and the NCOS modeling. Certainly there were some that were pro, but I believe the majority was likely not, and continued to express collective concerns over the process that BOEM uses, and skepticism over the dearth of research and data before BOEM makes these decisions that have such great potential impact on fisheries, economies, communities, and potentially our California large marine ecosystem and the productivity it brings to us all across the ocean and thereby to the coast. I am frankly, I'm not surprised anymore, but still taken aback by the fact that BOEM, regardless of the fact that we have not really done the research that needs to be done, that there is no PEIS, that we haven't really explored cumulative impacts analysis, that they're going to go ahead anyway and start leasing. And through this process, almost from the beginning, I said, from what I see of the BOEM process, it's a lease first and ask questions later process, which is just totally backwards and only serves to get to the BOEM agenda without a proper understanding of the background and what their decision making may actually bring. We don't know if in the end that offshore wind development at scale that's being proposed over time is a blessing or a curse. And we have other examples of large scale projects such as the Columbia River Dam development that brought great prosperity, but it also brought great cost relative to the iconic salmon runs in our culture and heritage of the Northwest and the coast. So frankly, I'm just stunned, I guess, by how BOEM marches on in lieu of adequate research, and I do have what I consider the lack of adequate research and the understanding of what these implications of these developments are broadly, potentially. I am curious to know whether the PEIS that Nessie referred to is before or after the lease sales. And I wondered how inclusive it truly is, because I recall, the Morro Bay EA and the opening paragraph in that request RFI, how this EA at that time would help determine whether or not an EA specific to the site action should be expanded to be including a programmatic EIS. And frankly, that one paragraph that had that at the beginning of it, you never heard the word or words programmatic EIS through the rest of the document. So it was kind of a specious or disingenuous lead into the description of the EA. So I don't know, what the PEIS that Nessie was referring to. I don't know what the timing of that is exactly. And I don't know how expansive it's going to be and what the scope of it is. But if it marries up with what experiences we've had so far, it's going to be pretty limited. And I hope that's not the case, but I suspect that it will be. And once these leases are made and rents are collected, I doubt very much that you're going to see any halt of the progress, even if there seems to be continued and maybe even newer concerns expressed by stakeholders and other users. This skepticism, their request to slow this process down, to do a cumulative impact analysis, it comes from conservation NGOs, it comes from the tribal community, it comes from the stakeholder community, it comes from government agency representatives and the PFMC. And frankly, as Susan said, we try to speak where we can, but who's listening? We hardly get any responses collectively or even singularly to the specific questions that are posed in these comments. And that's, I guess, the end of my comment. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, thanks, Larry. Lila?
Thanks, Mike. I forgot two things to say after Blake and I presented. Could we? Yeah, just wanted to add a couple of things here, if that's okay. So firstly, wanted to just say thanks to CDFW. We talked with them about the data and have a data sharing agreement with them to, get the data that was needed for this effort, and inviting comments from them on this overall effort and the methodology. So wanted to just shout out to them, many thanks. And that in the meantime, you know, I know we didn't have a lot of time today to get into it, but if you have other thoughts, questions, or comments about this effort that you want to send to me and Blake, you know, feel free in the next couple weeks to reach out. And Blake, did you want to add anything? I know you put up the slide for the data sources for California.
I know that covered it. Thanks, Lila. You did it all.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Mike.
You're very welcome. All right, Griffin, what do you say?
I think we're good. Any more hands?
I don't see any.
Well, we're 11:59. So yeah, why don't we break for our lunch, and we will come back with what have we got?
A detailed California update.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll do the state updates. California first, then Oregon and Washington. Yeah, so everyone take an hour for lunch and reconvene here at 1 p.m. I will leave the meeting up and running, but I'm going to mute myself, mute everyone else, and we'll see you all at 1.
Hey, Carrie, are you going to put up a slide indicating that we're on lunch and we'll come back at 1?
I certainly will, and I will pause the recording, and Susan will remind me to restart it because I'll forget when we come back at 1.
Look at that.
Thank you. I think I even put that in our note. Terry, start the recording after lunch.
You might have.
Okay, thanks. So next up is the state updates, and I think California is.
Yeah, so I'll start and then call on Crystal to add to anything that she may know that we don't. There is no real updates from California in terms of new things that we're expecting. I did get some clarification, and you'll see some when we put the year at a glance slide up at some point later. We did move around some of the items. For example, the draft programmatic EIS for the culture opportunity areas. I got confirmation from Celia that that's likely going to be published after the council's September meeting. So that'll be in Q4 now. I think so. Nope, Q3 still. My months are all screwed up. Also, the joint publication of a notice of intent and a notice of preparation for the environmental docs for the CADEMO project. For recollection, that's the 4-turbine pilot project being proposed in state waters off California, off Vandenberg Space Force Base. We got confirmation from the State Lands Commission that those documents won't be published until late this year or early next year. We got confirmation from the Energy Commission that documents required by Senate Bill 605, just for recollection, that is to study the feasibility of wave and tidal energy. That will be out likely towards the end of May, the initial draft. And then for the Humboldt EIR process for the heavy lift marine terminal, I have tried to get some updates on when we can expect those documents. I have no additional information on that. So in our year at a glance, we will leave it where it is, but probably highlight it as something that is likely to change. We did hear earlier today from Nessie that we are still up in the air with regards to whether or not BOEM will identify additional call areas off California. So we'll move that in our year at a glance as well to Q4 as opposed to where we have it now, which I think is in Q2. I don't have it in front of me. And that's my updates on what's going on from California. Crystal, if you have anything that you want to add, please come off mute and share with the group.
Yeah, just one thing. I think that progress updates for the leaseholders in California are on BOEM's website. So just that's available. It might be interesting to check out. And that's all I had. Otherwise, you kind of took all the other updates I would have provided.
Sorry for that.
No, it's good. I'm glad you did. Thanks.
Yep. All right, Carrie, I think that's it on California. Told you it was going to be quick.
It was quick. Thank you. And thanks, Susan, for posting the link. Maybe before the end of the meeting, we can put the updated slide with the NPC year plan.
Yeah, that was sort of my plan when we got down to the other agenda item on future workload planning, to throw up. I sent around an updated draft of that late last night, updated through today. I just need to, I need to add in the California call areas based upon what Nessie said, but we'll throw that up at the end of the meeting so folks can have a look at it.
Cool. Sounds good. Then I guess next up is Oregon, Susan and Jessica.
Okay. I will get us started and then look to Jessica for some of the other updates. We got several, the most notable of which is Nessie covered in the BOEM update earlier today with an EA and proposed sale notice coming out before the end of April. Along with that, as I talked about, and Jessica and I have talked about in the past MPC meetings, the informal working group for offshore wind that was convened by representatives from the seafood industry, the renewable energy industry, and labor groups we've been meeting for 9 months to complete a foundational roadmap to with exit ramps to transfer to the state and advise the governor's office on responsible way to move forward considering offshore wind in the greater Oregon energy portfolio. We met yesterday to finalize that and kind of wrap things up. And before we transmit it to the governor's office and before the Department of Land Conservation and Development takes over and does the outreach and engagement to develop a more comprehensive roadmap for Oregon, which I think Jessica will speak to a little bit more here in a minute. That roadmap process was also part of House Bill 4080, which passed the short legislative session this year, and the governor signed into law on March 27th. It funded a couple extra positions for DLCD and, gives them the time to work with the public to develop it. So, what else? You will, anybody who's interested can hear more about that when the conveners of that working group are making a presentation to the Oregon Ocean Policy Advisory Council tomorrow, and it's all virtual. I will drop a link in the chat. And you will also hear from DLCD about some of their preliminary plans for public engagement on that. Just to note, the OPAC meeting is, you need to pre-register for that. So when I drop the link in there, you just need to put in your name, affiliation, email, whatever, get a link back, and you will be pre-registered to join the meeting. Oregon Sea Grant has hired a new offshore wind energy person. Her name is Sarah Sweat. I'll drop a link into the chat with some background about her as well. Oregon Sea Grant got some funding to hire a person to do some outreach and engagement on offshore wind. And I watched 4 of the interviews. They had 4 interviews with people from all over. Sarah's background is in New England. She's dealt with offshore wind and some of the communities and fishing entities on the East Coast. I think she'll be a great addition. What else? Let's see. I think that's all I had. I will turn it over to Jessica to talk more about DLCD, the consistency review, and some other updates.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. And yes, I saw in the chat, just to clarify, the OPAC meeting is on Monday, 4/22.
Thank you. God, I can't keep anything straight these days.
No judgment here. It was hard for me to even find the link, and I've been through the council process a lot. So
yeah.
So yeah,
Thanks,
the first
Jessica.
update, just to add a little bit of context. So as you all saw in Nessie's presentation of that BOEM timeline, there is a federal consistency review that's also will be occurring as part of this leasing process. It's our understanding that we're expecting the state federal consistency review process to include a 70-day review period for the state. So that's the regular 60-day as well as an anticipated 15-day extension. And that'll begin around the same time that BOEM releases that draft EA and PSN. And this process includes a public comment period where the council would have the opportunity to provide public comment to the Oregon Coastal Management Program, which is part of Department of Land and Conservation Development and the state. So it's kind of an additional comment period that is available there. So just wanted to add that bit of context. And as Susan mentioned, part of 4080 was hiring on with DL CD an additional federal staff member for this federal consistency review, as well as someone to coordinate and move forward the roadmap process. So that will all be happening under the lead there of Department of Land and Conservation Development. I don't have anything else to add kind of on that front. Sue's mentioned the OPAC meeting. There's also a couple of letters I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to that are Oregon related and offshore wind. So the Coastal Caucus sent a letter on April 1st requesting the governor convey the caucus's position to BOEM that no lease auctions should occur on the South Coast until after the completion of the Oregon roadmap. This highlighted some of additional comments that were also part of the Protect U.S. Fishermen March 26th letter. So there's that letter, and I can provide that as well. And then 2 days ago, so on April 16th, there was a letter from Oregon Governor Tina Kotek to BOEM, and this letter discussed HB 4080 in the roadmap and kind of the process that has been happening in Oregon, and requests that BOEM affirm that they will not permit any offshore wind projects to move ahead with construction on the Outer Continental Shelf until Oregon's roadmap is complete and the state has had a reasonable amount of time to complete any formal policy amendments that directly result from that roadmap recommendations. So those are kind of just letters that are kind of also kind of associated with the process and where we are for offshore wind in Oregon. Moving from offshore wind to wave energy, I have a PacWave update. So OSU hopes to conduct marine cable lay for transmission cables this summer for PacWave South and deploy some research equipment at PacWave North for a new 15-year term of year-round research pending final approval. And just so everyone is aware, there's no open comment periods on these projects. And if they have more in-depth questions about, if any of you have more in-depth questions about any regulatory statuses to send, I can send you to Delia for that because she's kind of our lead for wave energy. So no comments there. That's just more of an update on wave energy. So you know where we are here in Oregon. And that's all I've got. Happy to answer any questions on those. Yeah, Mike, I see your hand. Go for it.
Yeah, just curious if I heard that right. There's supposed to complete the roadmap before they start construction, and the roadmap would be done in, is there an estimated time or?
Yeah, great question, Mike. So part of the legislation for House Bill 4080 was that there needed to be a report back to the legislature, I believe in September of 2025, kind of like a status update on the roadmap.
So in that there's, since the construction itself probably wouldn't take place for, I don't know, 5 years or better, then, but they are still leasing and taking other, setting it up, pre-staging for what could be future construction. And so if the leases were out and the opinion came back from the state that we don't want this in Oregon or off Oregon, anybody commented on what that might run into, I guess, as far as if the leases are already in place?
Yeah, I think that's a BOEM question, Mike. I don't have a specific answer for that, or, have confidence in what my answer would be.
Yeah, I might be asking the wrong person, but I just kind of curious. It seems like there could be a little bit of a conflict there if that did happen. All right, thank you.
Any other questions for Jessica or Susan? Anyone else from Oregon want to in on this? All right, then I guess we can move up the coast to Washington. Unless Mike O's and back down. So let's turn to, not Susan back up. With Corey Niles and Mike Conroy on the hook to give any update from Washington.
You mean either Mike speak about. I don't have any real updates. Just to remind folks, where we are in the state is, the governor's at the governor's initiative. They've hired a consultant, GridWorks, to work to talk to folks, stakeholders, and the governor is doing some consultations with the tribes on this general question of how could public engagement in Washington look if we go forward with offshore wind planning. So I know they've talked to a number of folks, including people on this call, and we'll be issuing a public review draft of the report sometime in May, and that report will be due to the governor's office June 15th. Beyond that, we have a WCMAC meeting on May 8th, where I'm not sure if GridWorks will be presenting there or not at this point. But I do expect that one thing that will be announced at the May 8th meeting will be there'll be a special WCMAC meeting second week of July to discuss the findings that come out in the final report. Other than that, I don't have anything, but I don't know if anyone else in the call would have anything to add either, but happy to answer any questions.
I put my hand up. Corey, you said that the consultant report is due to the governor in June. Did you mention, is that the draft, or is there a draft coming up for comment before then?
Yeah, that'll be the final report in June 15th. They're gonna try. I haven't heard them give the specific date in May when there'll be a public review draft, but backing up from June 15th and enough time to take public comment or comments on the report into the final. I would expect it's going to be early May. We should see that public review draft, and I think it was in our informational report that this group highlighted to the council of the possibility of doing a quick response comment letter on that public review draft. And I don't
Okay,
think they've
thank you.
said how long they would expect to leave it open for comment.
Thank you. Mike-O, did you have anything to add to the Washington update?
I really don't have much to add because I was kind of out of commission for a while there, some personal matters. But the one thing did you mention that open letter to coastal interests and representatives from the governor's office? Corey?
Nope.
Okay, there is an open letter. I think I can send it or put it in the chat or send it to you, Carrie, one or the other. And it basically, I guess, is a summation, or the project is not intended to evaluate potential offshore wind development, but rather to recommend the design of a comprehensive and transparent process to do so and communicate this framework within a final report to the governor's office due June 24th. And I just discovered that today. So, but anyway, that's it. I missed the last technical committee meeting. And like I said, I've been a little bit distant from this whole process for the last month and a half or so. That's it.
Thank you. Larry, I see your hand up. Is this a clarifying question for Mike, or was there something that that is on the radar screen in Washington that we should be aware of?
I almost asked Larry to jump in if he could, because he's on the he's our co-chair, or currently only co-chair of our offshore wind committee. If he had any thoughts I missed.
Thank you for the opportunity to offer some comments outside of the group here. I did want to kind of back up and reiterate what Nessie said earlier and what has been said by BOEM now for quite some time when asked about what's going on in Washington. And from the BOEM perspective, the answer is nothing. And except that BOEM has participated with the WCMAC general membership meetings to offer the update of nothing, and then explained other updates and answered questions that were posed by the WCMAC. So they have been present, but it hasn't been a formal process. And I just wanted to say that relative to the GridWorks project, they have reached out to different stakeholders. We had a meeting not long ago with 21 participants from recreational fishing interests and commercial fishing interests. And there was a host of input, or a lot of input from the stakeholders to GridWorks, and they seem to be listening. They offered a summary of that meeting, which I felt still kind of missed some of the key factors, but generally was pretty positive. Back to Nessie's comment, I wanted to just reemphasize to those that already know and maybe inform those who maybe don't. Washington is not a part of the 30-30 administration goal, the 30 gigawatts by 2030, and is also not a portion or an identified contributor to the secondary goal, which was announced in September of 2022 of 15 gigawatts of floating offshore wind energy by 2035. And I believe that since we are not a part of that mandate at this juncture, meaning Washington, that we stand to benefit from the observations of the Oregon and California BOEM experience and the processes, the permitting processors, and from additional data that might be collected before those Oregon and California projects moved any further than where they are. And so the stakeholders to GridWorks, and we hope to the governor, the fundamental message was to not initiate a formal BOEM process in Washington at this time. Whether that is how well that's captured, or if it's captured in the GridWorks report, we will see. But that was the foundational and collective expression, I believe, by most stakeholders. There was Heather Mann was at the meeting. She could speak to that if I'm off the mark. And Mike O was at the meeting. Dale Beasley's also on this call. He was at that meeting. So if there's any follow-up that should be added, I would defer to them and ask Carrie to give them an opportunity if they feel that there's something else that should be added. Thanks.
Thanks, Larry. Yeah, I mean, I guess if it's specific to the outreach meeting, something that will, the outreach meeting, or what am I trying to say? The GridWorks stuff or the WICMAC stuff. Yeah, go for it. We do have the public comment slot in an hour, so just remember that. But if anyone has something else to add to those Washington topics, go ahead and raise your hand. All right, then I think that brings us to what a tribal update that we have on the agenda, and Susan Chambers, I think, it's going to share something.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, Steve Joner couldn't be here, but I did just want to note that he did participate as the tribal member on the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine's Standing Committee on Offshore Wind. That took place right in the middle of the Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting in April. I think it was April 8th and 9th. So he did participate in that, and he has been actively trying to get new members added to that committee. And so far there's no updates on that, but I'll drop a link into the chat for the standing committee. It has links to all the past events if any of you want to see what they talked about. I think that was the first meeting where we heard from BOEM that the time schedule for the Oregon wind energy areas and leasing calendar. So that's all I have on behalf of Steve, and I'm sure he'll be back the next time we meet.
Cool, thank you, Susan. Any questions for Susan? Tribal update? Great, thanks for sharing that with us. Okay, let's see. So we are now officially a bit ahead of schedule. It's 1:30 about. The public comment period is scheduled for 2 p.m. And so while I'm stalling for time here, if anyone wants to make public comment, can you please raise your hands? Click the little icon at the bottom of your screen so you have an idea if and who wants to make public comment today. And I know that we also have Rick Robbins will be joining us. He's not here yet. He's in between flights. I think he's going West Coast or East Coast, but he was going to join us. We were shooting for 2 o'clock. And so he's going to join as soon as he can and give us an update on some of the Canopy Wind survey activities. He's not here yet, but we expect him soon. In the meantime, I see one hand up, and that is Dave Kashida. So, Dave, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for getting me online here. What I'm going to say is I brought this up last year at a BOA meeting that was back east, and it just concerns how the whale migrations seem to have changed historic patterns abruptly after they put in all these wind farms back there. And is there anything being done on the West Coast to study if that may happen or may not happen? Because it just seemed like all of a sudden the migration of whales went in a different direction, and it's a concern. Thank you.
Do we have anyone from NOAA here?
Yes, you do.
Hello,
Hello,
there,
Gary.
Laura.
Hi. Hey there, Dave. So, we are monitoring. I mean, we are out there monitoring whales all the time. So, if there's a change, we'll be able to see it. I know that BOEM is hosting a workshop on setting up a passive acoustic monitoring system on the West Coast, similar to what NOAA and BOEM have worked on the East Coast. So that would also that will also be important for monitoring whale migration. But yeah, there hasn't yet been any activity, offshore wind development activity yet. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, thank you. No, I was just wondering when I brought it up at the back east meeting, they just told me that no, the wind farms had no effect on the whales migration. It just was coincidental. So I was just wondering if that's something that is kind of in the plan. So thank you.
Well, and I guess I don't know if you were here for the presentation this morning that Lisa Pfeiffer gave on our NIMS West Coast Offshore Wind Strategic Science Plan. She mentioned that it's going to be really important for us to be able to distinguish what changes might be seen in the ecosystem or to species specifically, whether it's attributed to an offshore wind farm or climate change or climate variability, or some other factor. So that's definitely a complicating factor, right? Having a lot of this variability already in the system.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Lila, if I may follow up, one of my most sort of main take homes from the integrated ecosystem assessment presentation at the March Council meeting, which is always interesting, was the habitat compression that happened. And so, they were looking at like sea surface temperatures. And I'll get this mostly right, but probably not perfectly right. But basically, out in sort of the broader North Pacific, there were elevated temperatures, not as elevated as a couple of years ago with the warm blob, but they were elevated. But there was still a good amount of coastal upwelling, which brought cold, nutrient-rich water in the near to the shore. And so animals like whales and birds and, other cetaceans that sometimes may be farther offshore were compressed. And so, regardless of sort of the impact of wind farms on whale migration with habitat compression, and we see more entanglement, crab gear, other sort of buoy type gear. But anyway, so that I just felt that was really interesting. That whole presentation is really wonderful to watch. If you guys haven't seen it, it is recorded. We can not that long, like 45 minutes or something. But anyway, that whole notion, or not notion, but the fact that habitat suppression is, it's important because if migration is being, or their, just their feeding or whatever is being pushed closer to the shore, then obviously it's right for more interaction with human activity.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Carrie.
Hey, Lila, can I ask you a question?
I suppose, yes.
And the comments that Dave just made reminded me of this. And I know I've asked this in past meetings, but in terms of incidental harassment authorization requests by the current lessees, are those still making their way through protected resources? Because I haven't seen any published in the Federal Register yet for any of the site assessment and site characterization activities off the West Coast.
Yeah, so at this time, there aren't any, to my knowledge, that are coming out soon that have been requested for near-term work.
Okay, so if
there was, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's just if a lessee is intending to start their site assessment, site characterization work soon, like within the next 3 months, would they have to file an IHA request or not if they don't think that there will be any level A or level B takes?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. If they're not anticipating that, then they would not need an IHA.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Lila. Thanks, Mike. Looking for any other hands for public comment. I was also looking for the links to the EWG meeting that was in, I think, February, that was recorded with the IDA presentation, or it's also from the March. Someone is more savvy than I am, since I can't talk and find the links.
Carrie, the EWG doesn't usually record our meetings.
Oh, maybe it wasn't an EWG meeting. Was it a standalone?
It was the MPC February meeting, I believe, that Kelly presented that to us.
Yeah, but there was a separate.
I just put in the chat a link to that. There are some recordings on there.
Yeah, of the IEA report, like the full report.
The February 27th meeting?
Yeah, and that'll just be the IEA ecosystem status report. So if that's the only part that gets recorded.
Yeah, that's what I meant. You can look at the IEA presentation. Thank you. I didn't mean to imply. All right, there's a hand up. Larry, you have some public comment for us. I was surprised that you didn't put your hand up.
Well, I made that comment earlier, so I wasn't planning on making another, except I wanted to make a comment that relates back to a question that Dave Kashida asked. So that's my public comment. My second public comment is relative to that. So from my understanding, the East Coast offshore wind developments are not in designated critical habitat areas, whereas on the West Coast, the developments are in critical habitat areas, designated areas for 2 ESA humpback whale DPSs adjacent to and overlap, especially relative to transmission corridors, the southern resident killer whale critical habitat, blue whales, and leatherback turtles. Now, by regulation, federally permitted or funded ocean developments are not supposed to offer or cause migration changes, forage fish impacts, noise, and water quality negative impacts. Now, earlier, NOAA representatives stated that the critical habitat area was not really being considered because it was a regulatory definition. But it seems to me that with that specific mention within the regulations, that developments within a critical habitat or activities within a critical habitat that bring those potential impacts are at least noteworthy, if not actually bringing a regulatory examination of a development that might carry those impacts. So there is a difference between the East Coast lack of critical habitat and the interest in affecting migration patterns, and what ought to be an interest in the same question on the West Coast, especially within the critical habitat area designations. So that's my second public comment. Thanks.
Okay, well, I can respond to that. So to clarify, our strategic science plan is looking at habitat generally. It's for research purposes. It is not a regulatory document. So it's looking at, it's guiding our activities on our trust resources, which would be habitat that is important to whales and sea turtles and, all the other NIMS trust resources. When it comes to consultation that we would do under the Endangered Species Act, when there's a proposed action, like site assessment and characterization activities that BOEM is proposing, or a specific offshore wind farm, there would be consultation on these things. And in that setting, we would look at the potential impacts of those activities on critical habitat that would be affected by it. I'm not sure how much else to say, but I hope that clarifies. Happy to answer follow-up questions if needed.
Thank you, Lila. All right. Oh, there's another hand up. Mike O. Mike Okonecki, go ahead.
Oh, Lila, you kind of lost me on that one. Could you go back over that? I couldn't tell if this would be under a regulatory plan or if this is like some non-regulatory plan as far as the governance of that or non-governance of that critical habitat. Is that, maybe you could explain it a little better, or at least I'll listen a little closer.
Okay. So our science plan is basically looking at what are the areas that NIMS needs to look at, what kinds of research do we need to be doing to fulfill our mission activities. Some of our mission activities are Endangered Species Act consultations, which would involve in critical habitat that is designated for listed species. So the research plan is guiding our research, but when we're looking at specific impacts in a regulatory setting on critical habitat, that comes under an actual consultation. So there has to be a proposed action, and then we perform a consultation on specifically what those impacts would be to a species critical habitat. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that any better, but the science plan is not a regulatory document, but it's basically informing what kind of science we need to do to understand the potential impacts to critical habitat. Baseline studies, other kinds of things.
And the research is based around offshore wind stuff or what? Or it doesn't matter?
Yeah, the strategic science plan that we went over this morning is specific to
Gotcha.
offshore wind. Yeah. Because, this is a whole new sector. So we're trying to gear up to be looking at, we have some scientific information already just based on the work that we've been doing for decades. But now with this whole new sector comes all new potential impacts. And so we're looking at where do we need to start some new scientific studies to address any gaps we have there.
And so the gaps would be informative only. I mean, what you're doing is filling in data gaps, but taking no action based on the results at this level. They'd have to go through another
Well, in order
regulatory
to,
process.
yeah, when we're basically saying, okay, in X many years, we're going to have to do, like, nobody's proposed an actual wind farm yet, right? But we expect there will be some proposed, let's say in the next 2 to 3 years, maybe, right? When we get a proposed action on that, we're going to have to perform consultations. And so we're looking at, okay, what is the kind of information we're going to need to know? And we're going to need some new scientific studies to help us inform the analysis that we're going to do on those consultations. So we need to start those now. We need to start that research now. So that's what the science plan is doing, is informing our research agenda that we're going to need to inform our consultations and other regulatory work.
So it would be foundational for that consultation process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I see Corey's hand up. Do you have more questions about?
No, Lila got to the point. I think Larry and Mike seem to be missing that it's going to be used in consultation eventually, but they got there.
And thanks, Lila. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up. We're still in public comment. I also do not see Rick Robbins on yet, unless Rick, you're hiding as an iPhone or something like that. So if you are, please unmute yourself. And I think on phone you do that. I see one iPhone. But the way you do that is, I think it's *6. Is that right? I don't join these meetings by iPhone. But anyway, yeah, you can see I'm stalling. So I know that Rick Robbins is going to join us. I think he was deplaning. What I would suggest to our chairs and to the NTC is that we move ahead to the next agenda item, which is discussion, where we can talk about what we've heard today and talk about putting together a report for the council for the advanced team briefing vote. Does that sound okay to you, Susan and Mike and everyone else? Then when Rick joins us, we can.
Sounds good to me.
Works here.
All right. Well, Mike, I think that you have an updated slide that's, for sort of what's coming up, but thank you. Very good. And then we have the report to write. I think we're getting pretty good at writing that. And I have, Vana, since you have that slide up, why don't we talk about what's coming? And then we can circle back to putting together the report and deadlines and things like that.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's fine, Carrie. And as you can see, I tried to color coordinate it this time to make it easier to see. So we moved the CAD demo notice, which was previously indicated for Q3 to Q4 based upon conversations with state lands. Based upon what we heard from Ness earlier today, moved California call areas from this quarter to the last quarter. Based upon the conversation that I had with Celia, just put a disclaimer on the draft programmatic EIS for the aquaculture opportunity areas off Southern California. It's likely going to come after the September meeting. And then, what's that?
Hey, Michael.
Yeah.
Can I interrupt real quick, just while you're on them? So, before today, or before your conversation with Celia, we were looking at summer, like July, for those AOAs, for the notice to come out. Is that, or the draft PIS? Is that?
Yeah, it was still within Q3, right? It was just July is at the beginning of Q3 and September's at the end of Q3. So it's same quarter, just different frame of reference in terms of the timeliness of this stuff.
Got it. But that's helpful to know that it would likely be after the September meeting.
Right.
Thank you.
And then I guess based upon what we heard from Lila, we can get rid of the IHAs and I'll just move those on so there's not any blanks. But that's, and you'll see that per the conversation that we had with regard to Washington, for this quarter, I added in the continuation of the Washington engagement strategy.
So we'll have some ideas. I mean,
Was somebody saying something I can't see? I'm looking at my screen.
I think someone just came off mute on accident.
Okay.
Accidental unmute.
So, yeah, Carrie, that's what I have thus far. More than happy, obviously I'll clean this up before we submit it into our report. But if there's anything that anybody sees that's noticeably missing or noticeably out of whack, feel free to weigh in at this point in time.
Are you still looking at your screen, Mike, and can't see my hand?
I am, and I can't.
Okay, great. I'll just hop in then. The only thing I would add here is there will be there's usually a public comment for federal consistency review to the state of Oregon. So I'm not sure if that's something that the MPC has commented before in the past or would want to, but it would just be something else that is a potential comment period that's open. And then also a final EA. I'm not sure if there's a public comment for an Oregon final EA.
I don't think that there is. But Jessica, when would you suggest that the consistency review for Oregon leases would be during Q3, or would it be starting? It'd probably be in this quarter, right?
Q2.
May through July is what is on Bones.
Yeah, so it kind of falls. What is that? If July is in Q3, it's kind of in between those, right? So I'm not sure when that would actually occur, but that's kind of the rough timeline.
Okay. All right, are we good here, Carrie? I can stop sharing this now?
Yeah, I just have one suggestion because my brain could work on Qs 1 through 4. Maybe just a little parenthesis. When you know the month like you did on the draft PEIS for AOAs, if you could do a parentheses month, that would be great. So like for the Oregon auction, according to Nessie's slide, that is October. So maybe we could just do October. Slow thinkers like me.
Okay. Yeah, I can certainly do that.
Maybe we just need 12 columns for one for each month now. But
yeah, because that wouldn't look too noisy.
Yes, please turn it into a Gantt chart for us.
You could put May for the Washington one too. But Jessica, I had a question for Jessica. I have my hand up, but I forgot you guys can't see them.
Yeah.
So I guess on the well, first of all, the consistency review is kind of central to Washington's marine spatial plan, and we have the enforceable policies, including our fishery use protection standard, which kind of gives my agency its direction. But just kind of on so in terms of this group or the council commenting, I think I'm still not following the whole roadmap idea, but I think you mentioned that including a review of your enforceable policies.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is there? You get where I'm going with the question?
I think I do, Corey, and correct me if I'm interpreting you wrong. So you're asking on like enforceable policies connection to the roadmap. Is that kind of?
Well, if you're going to be, well, trying to get it out of my mouth. If you're going to be reviewing the relevant enforceable policies as part of the roadmap, but also be reviewing consistency of the lease sales with which takes place on the enforceable policies now. So it sounds well. Maybe answering my own question. There might be a longer term look at your enforceable policies, but you still are going to be applying the ones the state will be applying. Evaluating the ones you have now for this lease stage.
Yes, you're correct. So currently, just focusing on this current federal consistency review process at the state is multiple state agencies are involved in the review and the authorization of those offshore wind developments and are participating in what is called the Core Team on Offshore Wind, or CETO. And it's a collaborative, proactive effort to determine which of those enforceable policies that you mentioned are relevant right now, or, when the time comes for BOEM's proposed offshore wind leasing process. And so ODFW has 2 staff members on CETO, with the expectation that several other staff are also going to be brought into that enforceable policy process based on their subject matter expertise. So we will be doing that federal consistency review regardless of the timeline for the roadmap. But then, yes, the roadmap could also consider any additional policies that are needed, which is kind of what is stated in the governor's letter.
Okay, thanks. I have trouble enough keeping track of Washington groups, but so that helped. Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any hands up. Rick Robbins was online, but he was having trouble with the audio. We did a test yesterday and thought we got it sorted out, but maybe not. So anyway, let's continue this discussion. And Susan, you flagged a question. You could go ahead and ask it, or if that person is in the meeting, they can ask it themselves.
Sure, it doesn't have anything to do with our statement. Well, I guess it could. So shout out to Jessie Dorpinghouse of council staff who asked the question. She asked me if I knew it, and I don't remember the slide that Blake showed. But Lila, maybe you can answer the question. I was wondering if there was a reason midwater rockfish is left out of the fisheries mapping exercise off California, because the midwater hook and it may be part of the fixed gear hook and line, but it would be helpful to set that apart and distinguish that, because that fishery is going to become even more important in the future. So I don't know if that is something you can answer, Lila, or if we just need to make sure we put that in our report, that should definitely be included and pulled out separately. And maybe Jesse can answer, if she has any other questions beyond that, I would defer to Jesse. So Lila, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. What was the fishery that you mentioned? The midwater rockfish?
Yes, midwater hook and line, or vertical hook and line rockfish fishery. This was part of the, Amendment 24, I think. Yeah, I'll let Jesse get into it.
You guys hear me okay?
Yep, we got you.
Yep.
Great. It was like the slide that had the little red box around it. And there was actually two things I noted. Maybe I just overlooked it. But one was the midwater rockfish, like the trawl fishery. I saw FT hake, I saw shoreside whiting, and then I didn't think I saw like midwater rockfish, which has become a big fishery in the last 7 years. So maybe I just missed it. I don't know who's pulling up notes here. And apologies if I just.
Well, yeah, how about, oh wait, who's pulling that? Who is that?
Carrie.
Oh,
yep. Keep going down.
I was like, oh, great. Is Blake on the line?
Keep going.
Yeah.
Right there.
Yeah, see, you can see here that it says like hake, bottom trawl, and then there's 2 fixed gear. But I think a really big part of our groundfish fishery that should be captured, that there is some that operates off of, parts of California, is the midwater rockfish fishery. And I do know that WCOG, which is, I'm guessing where the state is coming from, most of it, does have that separated out. So that's one part of it. And then the second part was that it says fixed gear long line. I would just want to make sure that that includes all hook and line gears, because I think what Susan was trying to get to was the fact that our hook and line fishery, particularly off of California, is becoming more and more crucial as nearshore restrictions have come into place. That fishery needs to be captured, because it is going to be crucial moving forward.
Okay. I might follow up with you, with Blake too, to talk more about this. But I took some notes here.
Yep, Carrie knows how to get a hold of me too.
All right.
I'm
Awesome.
happy to help.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Couldn't get back into the meeting. Okay, I don't see any more hands up. I think we were still in public comment. Oh no, we were in discussion. That's right. And yeah, Lila and Becky, we can follow up on that if you need me or whatever. Let's see.
Carrie, I think Rick has joined.
Okay. I know he has joined back in, so I'm just playing catch up. So we're going to do an audio test here, Rick. So if you can unmute yourself, let's see if we can hear you and confirm.
Yeah, Carrie, I'm not hearing really well, but are you able to hear me now?
You're fuzzy, but we can hear you. I can hear you. So yeah, well, why don't we give this a try? And do you want to share your screen, Rick?
Yeah,
or do you want
Carrie, if you don't mind sharing, I'm on my phone, so that'd be great. And I'll try to keep this brief and just provide a quick update, and I'll try to limit it to any new information. So we just had a couple of minor changes to schedule and vessel and things like that. So I'll try to focus on it because we've already provided a number of briefings to the committee. But if you want to go ahead and pull up that deck.
Yeah, no problem. And it's the one that you sent last night. You didn't send a, or did you just send an updated one? Okay. So you'll just have to. So I have there's 19 slides here, but you said you didn't want to show them all, so you'll just have to, I guess, direct.
Carrie, is it displaying at this time? I'm not seeing it on my screen right now. I see. Coming up.
There we go. You should see it.
Yeah, if you want to run to the next slide, please. Yeah, there's nothing that's changed about the study area. The survey will be concentrated within the lease area, and then 1 or 2 notional investigative routes into the 50-meter contour. That's what's depicted here. That's consistent with what we indicated last time, and the all of that will be conducted in federal waters. If you want to go to the next slide. We still plan to conduct the high-resolution geophysical work using an AUV. None of that's changed. The only change on this slide is they're highlighted in blue, and the estimated start date has slipped a week to approximately June the 8th. We do expect to conduct about 40 days of data acquisition with the AUV, and then that'd be 40 days plus weather. So that's the expected timeline for that. And if you'll go to the next slide, the only other change that's significant is that we anticipate now and plan that we'll be able to collect the high-resolution geophysical data and the geotechnical samples all from the same vessel. So, we'll deploy the vessel, it'll go out and come in for a crew change, and then finish doing the high-resolution geophysical work, come back in, demobilize the AUV, and take on the geotechnical kit, and then go out and do the geotechnical sampling. And the geotechnical work is estimated to take 20 days plus weather. Then it'll all be done from the same vessel. And if you go to the next slide, I think we've got a picture, an indicative picture of a vessel that we would anticipate using. It's 260 feet in length, U.S. flagged. And we're still in the contracting process, but wanted to give you a sense of what we were working with. I thought that'll be a large vessel that we expect to be able to stay out for 4 weeks at a time. If you want to go to the next slide. We're actively recruiting onboard fisheries liaison candidates that we can send out for training, and they would go out for GWS safety training in the month of May. We've had good interest in that and expect to be able to have them trained and ready to deploy when the survey starts in early June. So we've had a good response to that. And if you go to the next slide, we do hope to be able to utilize the Waterfront app, and the app developer is planning to update it with the offshore California nautical charts to have that ready in time for the beginning of the survey. But we'll plan to have more of a briefing on that in advance of sort of kicking that off. But one of the really nice things about this app is if somebody sets fixed gear in an area, they're able to pin that location and send us an encrypted message, and it'll give us the coordinates of the gear. It doesn't go to anybody else. It would just come to us on our dashboard, but it'd be a confidential encrypted transmittal they would send, and then we could tell the survey vessel where the gear was. So it takes any ambiguity out of location, and it prevents a fisherman from having to, get in, look at their plotter, send us a message, send us a text, that additional step. It's just a very efficient way to do it. So we're hoping to have that in place by the time of the beginning of the survey. And that's all I have today, chairs, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide this update. I'm in the airport and apologize for the background noise today.
Hey, Rick, if I can just ask a real quick question. You said you were getting a lot of interest in the onboard fisheries liaison. I hope that they're primarily from folks based up in the North Coast where your lease site is?
The inquiries have been local. And, we reached out to the local associations when we made that request. And I think that'll be ideal to have local fishermen because they'll know who they're talking to on the radio. I mean, the primary role there is to manage coordination and bridge-to-bridge communications with the local fleet. So I think they'll be in a good position to do that. Yeah,
Perfect.
thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Be glad to answer any other questions if you have any.
Anybody have any other questions for Rick? Rick, it looks like you're free to enjoy the airport.
Cool.
Oh, Carrie, did you have one?
Airport. So, well, just quick. Some airports are less enjoyable than others. But also, Rick, I think, like I said, there's more slides in here than he needs. But we'll post whichever slides, Rick, you want me to post to this meeting webpage. Will be fine. And I appreciate you joining us and giving us this quick update. All right. That put us. Yeah.
All right, Carrie, where are we at now?
Yeah, I just asked you that question too.
Well,
so I guess, yeah, we were looking at the calendar. I think we finished up the year at a glance. And so I had started talking about putting together the report. And like I said, we've gotten pretty good at that. And so we would ask the presenters today to to work on putting together their section. And and as far as dates, we talk dates. I could find it.
Yeah, was that a question?
It was a question to myself.
Yeah, so I think, yeah.
There we go. Okay, I found the date. Someone inserted so many slides and
Sorry.
didn't find it. But the slides came in handy. No, it came in handy because I could grab the one that you posted in there. So so for the advanced briefing book deadline is about May 8th. You should pencil that in. As you know, we get sort of a range of due dates so we don't slam our admin staff with a billion pages all in one day. But that's a good target, is May 8th for the advanced briefing book deadline. If it seems early this year, it is because it is early. The June meeting is in pretty early June, and normally it's more like mid or sometimes late June. But anyway, we're a little compressed. So working backwards from that, or maybe working forwards from next week, we were thinking that a week from today, on the 25th, send sections to me and Mike and Susan, and then we'll put those together and we'll hopefully turn around a draft the next day and send it out to you all with comments due on May 3rd. And then that gives us a few days to put any finishing touches on it, answer any lingering questions, bug anyone who hasn't submitted their section by then, and then we'll put it into the June briefing book. So are there any questions or concerns about each of your tasks, which are basically generally mirror this agenda in the presentations today, or questions or concerns about the proposed schedule for getting the report done? No questions, no concerns. All right. Then Mike, I'm not seeing any hands up. Do you want to talk about anything else, like the West Coast Oceans Wind Summit from last month or whenever that was, and the long-term coastwide cumulative effects analysis that?
Yeah,
we've
so
been
let's,
discussing?
and I'm going to call on Lila to help me fill in some blanks where I might get it wrong. But think it was at the beginning of this month, the West Coast Oceans Alliance met in person in lovely Sacramento. I was on a panel with Lila, Nessie, Jeff from Oregon DLCD, and Lila, forgive me, I don't remember who. There was one other, Jana Gagnon from the governor's office from California, talking about, unknowns, data needs, and whatnot with regards to offshore wind. I was able to convey what we had been tasked to work on with regards to this long-term cumulative impacts analysis, and just to sort of raise awareness that the council is putting together, for the lack of a better word, some research and data needs that it envisioned as being important from the fisheries and fishing community standpoint, sort of to whet people's appetites and to give some, sort of some heads up that, hey, this is what we're doing. I think what I had to say piggyback well on what Lila had to say. And I think our panel was warmly received. I may be biased in that regard, but I think that's how well it went. Lila, do you have anything you want to add to this?
No, you've covered it well.
Okay. I see Tommy Moore's on this call, and he was in attendance at that. I don't want to put Tommy on the spot, but heck, why not? If your perspectives were along those lines, and if you thought that it was helpful, that would be good to know.
Hi, Mike. Yeah. That was a good meeting, and kind of agree with what you'd said. It was good to hear everyone's views and kind of bring a wide group together for a fairly open discussion.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tommy. So that's how that went, Carrie. And you and I, when we were having a conversation about this meeting, we kind of reminded ourselves that we do have a task in front of us for November, which is that long-term cumulative impacts sort of research information need wish list. And at some point in time, we're going to have to sit down and actually do that. So I think that's, in terms of planting that flag here during this meeting, is just to kind of remind folks that we have that on our plates and to start thinking about how we address that. And maybe, during the during the June meeting, a subset of us that are going to be in San Diego can sit down and start to frame how that's going to go. Sorry, I'm speaking for you here, Carrie. Maybe you have a different perspective.
No, I think that's good. I was also, when the time is right, going to talk about the more immediate comment opportunities.
Yeah, no, and I think I just wanted to get that because we do have some likely comment opportunities that are going to arise between now and our June meeting. If we assume, per the presentation that we got from Nessie, that we're going to have a draft EA and draft proposed sale notice within the next 12 days, the proposed sale notice by regulation will have a 60-day comment period, which will overlap with the council meeting. But depending upon when that comment period closes, at least in my humble opinion, will inform whether or not we use the QR process on the proposed sale notice, or whether we do what we did with something recently, where we actually discussed it at the council and got the council's blessing on what we provide them. So that'll be something that we have to think about. I would imagine that the draft EA will have a different comment period. Using history as a guide, those are typically 30 or 45 days. So that might not overlap with the council meeting as much as the proposed sale notice, but something out there. Also, we heard from Corey that the GridWorks draft engagement strategy plan should be out sometime in May. That'll be something that we have to consider commenting on, and if so, probably through the QR process as well. And the same holds true with the Oregon consistency review process for the leases offshore Oregon. I guess what I'm trying to say is, in short, between now and the June council meeting, it looks like there's going to be plenty of opportunity for folks to do a bunch of writing and reading and editing and approving.
Yeah, it could be a lot coming all at once, and it's always a little tricky. I think we did a pretty good job at the end of last year, knowing that there were some of these fairly heavy lifts coming and making sure it's on people's radar screens, because, you know, if you wait until it hits the street, especially if it's a short 30 or 45 day comment period, especially if it's a quick response scenario, then, you know, we can't really afford to just wait till it hits the streets and then look at each other and say, okay, you know, who's going to do this? So we should all take to heart Mike's encouragement to be ready to participate. Some, you know, obviously this is going to be, you know, more sort of relevant to some of the NPC members than others. And in some cases, like I would expect, and Jessica can chime in if she wants to, you know, if there's an Oregon consistency, you know, process and or determination, you know, coming, I would think that Jessica's, you know, not going to like draft up comments on it, but maybe she can help guide us in the process. That's a, so, you know, Mike and Susan, I don't know if you want to try to get people's names assigned to each of these right now, or send around a sign up genius after this, or what?
Well, before we jump into that, I see Jessica's been patiently waiting to say something. So
Thanks, all.
Hi,
Yeah, one, just to clarify, I had to go remind myself about Jesse and Susan's comment about midwater rockfish trawl. And the reason why it says hake for like the Oregon data sets is that most of our midwater rockfish occurs in like the northern part of the state and kind of mid-state, so it wasn't really in those areas that we were looking at, so that's why it just says hake. So just wanted to put that out there, and you can see those maps, at least the ODFW versions of where midwater rockfish is occurring in OraWind map. So just wanted to clarify that point, but do agree that yes, if coastwide or, you know, other fisheries should always be considered to make sure we're looking at the whole picture and new gear types and making sure all the gear types are comprehensive. But on the overlapping potential comment periods and the quick responses and June, from my perspective with the state, I will say that we're in preparation for this, we're at or over capacity. So I'm definitely here as a resource to make sure I can help review and provide coordination and context. But I will be drafting simultaneously for ODFW's responses. So not sure that I can take on the full of the drafting, but happy to coordinate and help where I can and try and distribute that effort. So just wanted to be transparent there with my availability and resources, as we all have a bunch of things on our plate. So just wanted to be clear there.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. We'll also be doing things like putting together the June briefing book.
Yeah, we all have other things, and that's
so,
not me trying to say no one does.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So I think, you know, looking at 4 potential comment letters, some might be, you know, in the June briefing book, some might be QR process. I think being efficient with these and, you know, sort of short and sweet as reasonable is going to be important. You know, we did send in comments on the NOI for that EA that's coming, and some of these, and I think, didn't we submit comments on the California consistency review, or am I dreaming that? Maybe we just referenced it. But anyway, my point is that, you know, we have example that we have used in the past, and so we should be able to put together something. Let's not make more work than what's better.
And Carrie, I just threw the 2 most recent proposed sale notices that BOEM has published into the chat. One from March 21st, which is the Gulf of Mexico proposed sale notice. And then the other is the proposed sale notice from December of last year. Just so folks can get an idea of what would be included in a PSN. I think the bidding credits section within these are going to bear some looking at, but just so folks are familiar with them, so that when we see a proposed sale notice come out for Oregon later this month, it's not 100% foreign to everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And we also commented on the California proposed sale notice too. So
yeah, my guess is that the bidding credits that you saw come from California will look different from those you see that might come out of Oregon. That's not based on any knowledge or insight. That's just based on a feeling and a guess, given what we've seen with the PSNs that have followed.
Got it. Good to know.
Jessica.
Yeah, there's
Thanks.
also, I know there's also some presentations from when Humboldt, like thinking back on Carrie, to your point, like previous submitted reports for the Humboldt area and Morro Bay. There are those comments that can be used as reference, knowing that things do change and evolve over time. So we may see something different for Oregon, but it's a good starting point for reference. And then associated with those are those BOEM presentations, just, for people to come up to speed if it's been a while or if you've forgotten what's kind of included in each. I know coming on board new with this, I've been looking at those, so I can provide links if needed.
I just posted a link to our correspondence page. So that's where you'll find everybody. Yep. And then, of course, I have Word versions of those. If we grab some text from them. Okay, Mike.
I think you were
Susan,
just
where
getting
we
ready to volunteer some people to be on standby for specific things. Or do you want to do the passing around of a quasi sign-in sheet?
I defer to you on
Oh
this,
God,
Mr.
you're gonna make me be the
Co-Chair.
bad guy. Unless Jessica just raised her hand to volunteer to do it all.
I volunteer for all Oregon-related items to review and be part of the team in that sense. Not saying I'm going to do it all, though, so would appreciate drafters.
Mark. Yeah, well, I think we'd probably, for the GridWorks draft report, if and when that comes out, I think we'd probably look to our northern crew for help with that. Corey, Mike O, who else is up in Washington?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to
And,
explain where WDFW is coming from, but we'll be weighing in on the GridWorks report directly through our state interagency team. So I'd be looking for other folks from to weigh in from the MPC.
Okay.
Yeah, and to that point, Carrie, there are a number of us who participated in those GridWorks call, and I would like to think that between those folks, we can put together something short and sweet and responsive to the ask.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we need to, put alt names with these right now, but I think maybe in a follow-up email, we can hone in on some more details. And, again, until they hit the streets, we don't know for sure, if they'll overlap with the June council meeting. And, we'll have to talk to Merritt and Kelly about whether they think these should remain as QR letters. For example, the one we just commented on with AB 525, even though that did overlap with the council meeting, we or haven't finished it yet. They wanted to run that ad through the QR process. So We'll have to confirm that.
Oh, that's because
Anyway, I'm
that's
comfortable.
because marine
Yeah.
planning wasn't on the April
I'm sorry.
agenda, right?
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
that was the main
Yeah.
reason.
But the
Um,
NOI, the
and it
NOI
is on
letter
the-
that we did, when the deadline was extended, the council did get a chance to comment on that. So that's why the council did it then, because we were already on the agenda. God, that was like, what, November? March? One of those two.
It was
that
March, and
Yeah.
the council meeting happened prior to the deadline of the 22nd, I believe.
Right.
Yeah, but didn't we? Didn't we not put it in front of the council? We stuck with the QR. We just
No,
sent
the
it off
NOI
anyway,
for the Oregon EA was in front of the council in March, I believe.
Yes, because the deadline was extended, and so we had time to put it in front of the council. That was that big 45 pager or whatever. And so there was time to get it in front of the council in March. In April, since we weren't on the council agenda, that's why we did a QR letter for whatever it was we just did a QR letter for.
Yeah,
AB5, thank you.
525
Yes.
business. Okay. Well, in any case, yeah, the point is that we don't know for sure what these timelines are going to be, and we don't know for sure if they're going to be QR versus on the council agenda, or yeah, in the council briefing. So we'll just have to deal with that, but we can start getting ready for it. So Mike, Susan, and I can send around an email and you know, with some clarifications and in the meantime, everyone who has you know, was on the agenda today, please write up sections of your report and send them to us within a week. And am I missing? Is there anything that needs to go in the report that is not clear and obvious from today's agenda? Am I missing anything?
Not as of today. Doesn't mean that there won't be tomorrow.
All right. Well, I don't have anything else. Does anyone on the MPC or the chairs or does anyone have anything to add?
Just, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time to talk about this, but planning for the, you know, we've got, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carrie, but I think based upon the proposed agenda that was submitted in April, we have 2 hours of floor time during this meeting. And I'm fairly certain we want to try to keep our time on the floor under that or not exceed that by too much. What are we envisioning? I mean, obviously we'll have our report. We'll probably have a supplemental that includes things that are published after this report gets submitted. We'll have a presentation. Are we envisioning throwing an invitation out to either John from WACOA to make a presentation? We've heard from at least 2 of the fisheries liaisons from 2 of the leaseholders that they intend to come and give public comment. I guess that brings up a question, or any of the lessees going to want to come and say something about any plans that they have with regard to site survey work. And then are we going to, is the council going to get presented anything that we've, and this is, I guess, putting Lila on the spot, you know, anything that we saw today, probably more pertinent with regards to the first item that we saw updates on, and that would be the strategic science plan, and maybe not so much as regard to California, given that there's not really anything happening off California, but those fisheries data sets can come at a later time, I think.
Are you asking me?
I guess I kind of am. I mean, is it possible that you would want to, that NIMS would want time during our MPC item for the June meeting to discuss the strategic science plan?
Yeah, I'll see if we can have somebody, Lisa and some of our other folks there, to make the presentation. I mean, at least virtually. So I can't confirm right now, but yeah, let me look into that if that's of interest.
Yeah, I don't want to be the answer.
Thank you.
I think it would be of interest, but maybe I'm biased in that regard.
I mean, I think it would be great. So yes, if that is an invitation, then I will get back to you.
Carrie, am I authorized to provide invitations?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we'd look to you, Lila, if you guys are ready. I mean, I know the report isn't, public yet. So I think the council would be in it, and we probably have time on that agenda. So we'll wait to hear from you. And before I turn to you, Jessica, Mike, you asked about the offshore wind lessees, and yeah, I've heard from at least 2, maybe 3 that are interested in making public comment. Yeah, I don't think we can talk about that. It could be sort of part of the agenda itself, or what I've been telling them is public comment. So they might want to give updates on their site assessment characterization work. And I think one just wanted to sort of, these are the fisheries liaisons I'm thinking of, wanted to just introduce herself. And some of them might come to the San Diego meeting just to, make contact with some of the, mostly the advisory subpanels and that sort of thing. But anyway, but the answer to your question, Mike, is yes, I anticipate at least a couple of the, and actually we have some of them on the call still, who, will want to take a little floor time to introduce themselves, maybe show some slides and some info on their current activity.
Roger that.
Are we on this is workload planning, right, for the agenda? That's what we're talking about right now, it seems like. I just want to make sure. Okay, so one thing I do want to bring up, and I don't know, Carrie, you can probably provide more context on when it's appropriate. On council priorities, I know that's on the agenda in June, and how operations and priorities. And I know that part of this is all stemming from budgetary concerns and the committee of the whole meeting. And I know that the MPC has been brought up on some of those discussions, and where we fall within statutory core versus not. So just wanted to know thoughts on that. I'm not trying to add more workload for June, but that's a potential for us to weigh in June. I know that, though, I think that it'll also have a potential to weigh in September. So just wanted to hear what the group's thoughts on that were.
Well, my first thought is that, since this is our meeting to prepare for the June council meeting, the book isn't out yet. And so when that comes out, there will be a set of recommendations from the executive director. And we've been, for the most part, pointing advisory bodies to, wait for that to come out and then respond to some of those recommendations. This committee doesn't typically comment on, other things and other agenda items. But, I guess we could. I don't know how much appetite you guys might have, but also, it'd be a little bit awkward timing because, it wasn't on today's agenda and we don't have enough meetings. So I guess I was assuming that we would not come. That said, we might have commented in the past. I'm trying to remember during that council efficiencies business in the last, year or two. But everyone is also welcome to, make public comments. Anyone on this call can make public comments or go through your other advisory bodies and that sort of thing. And so, this committee is made up of representatives from our other advisory bodies. And I think, I would trust them, for those who are meeting in June, to be able to convey, the MPC's, priorities through their advisory body. But I mean, that's about all I got. So,
Hey, Gary.
Mike and Susan.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
Mike, did you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
No, your hand was up first. Then you're probably going to say
Oh,
what
okay.
I was going to say.
Okay. Well, at this point, I know during the committee as a whole, there was discussion about what to do with the MPC, whether the council's getting any value of it because it's not core, things like that. There were suggestions about running some of it through the gap, but since then, and in talking with council staff, a couple other staff, from what I understand, the council feels the MPC is doing a great job because we tackle some very difficult issues that are cross FMP. We don't cost the council a lot of money because all except for one meeting, it's been all virtual. So I think the council staff and the council feels they get a lot of bang for their buck out of the MPC. At this point, I would suggest we don't comment on it in preparation for June, simply because we could, maybe fly under the radar and, also wait until we see what the next report out is. But that's just my two thoughts, two cents.
Yeah, and I was going to functionally say the same thing as you, Susan. I mean, we were specifically brought up by name during the committee of the whole as a entity that could be looked at. But to your point, I think we've heard from enough council members, from council staff, and from others that acknowledge the value that we bring. That a wait and see approach probably makes sense. Just until we see what's there. And I think Carrie hit the nail on the head, right? I mean, to the extent that myself, Susan, Mike, and other folks that are on the specific ABs, we can have those ABs comment on the value that we bring, and hopefully that we don't end up on the chopping block.
Great. That's what I was hoping. I just wanted to initiate that discussion, so I wasn't assuming anything. Appreciate it all.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, I agree. Although some of you may secretly wish that the committee is on the chopping block, but sorry, you're probably not.
Speak for yourself, Griffin.
Given what we're facing, I think the MPC is badly needed.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of support for it. Okay, well, I think that's very reasonable. I think that's the right way to go too. It would be sort of awkward. I'm sure we could tell people how valuable we are, but I think advocates we can do that for. And we have a lot of letters to write. So, all right, back to that agenda item. Lila's going to get back to us, and I would like to sort of huddle after this and think about, whether, who else we invite. We often will invite Bohm to come and give an update, and John Hansen from West Coast Oceans, and or others. So I don't think we don't need to decide that now, but let's kind of see how the pieces fall into place as we get a little bit closer, and just take it from there. But we'll circle back with the committee and talk about writing assignments, dates, whatnot. I guess that's all I have. Mike, Susan, anyone else?
I think we're good.
No, I think we're good. I expected a lot more public comment, so.
I know, me too. We had like 50 people on earlier.
Wow.
So anyway, well, all right, then I'll say thank you to everyone. I really appreciate it. And Mike for largely running the show, and Susan for largely operating everything behind the scenes and taking notes and posting links and all that stuff. I'll let you two co-chairs close out the meeting here. Oh, there's a Dave Kushida hand up.
Hey, I can talk some more if you want. No, I'm just joking. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Dave.
Great.
All right, Carrie.
Mike,
What's that?
Susan, done?
I think
Are we
so.
done?
Thanks,
I think
everybody.
so. Yep.
We'll look forward to getting your individual sections to us by a week from today. And then Carrie, myself, Susan et al. Will synthesize that into one document and send it around for everybody's review so that we can at least complete our contributions to the advanced briefing book in relative short order. And I am equally certain that you'll be seeing emails from us within the next 2 weeks about a proposed sale notice, a draft EA, and God knows what else. So yeah, good times.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. You get an hour and 15 minutes of your life back.
Thanks all.
Thanks all.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.